The Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions will come to order. And let me get to the point of this hearing. Today in our country, over 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, and millions are working for starvation wages. Unbelievably, despite an explosion in technology and huge increases in worker productivity, the average American worker is making $50 a week less than he or she made 50 years ago after adjusting for inflation. Unless we change the nature of the way our economy works, it is all too likely that our younger generation will have a lower standard of living than their parents. What this means in reality is that workers throughout our country are struggling to pay for housing, struggling to pay for health care and prescription drugs, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to pay off their student debts, and to deal with other basic necessities of life. And while that is the reality for the working class of this country, here is another reality, and that is that the people on top have never, ever had it so good. Today in America, we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had, with the top 1% now owning more wealth than the bottom 90%, with CEOs now making 400 times what their workers are making, and with 3 people at the top owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society. That is the economic reality that exists today. People on top doing extraordinarily well, millions of working families struggling. And as a result of that economic reality, what we are now seeing is a major increase in trade union organizing. Throughout our country, in blue-collar jobs and in white-collar jobs, workers are standing up and they are fighting back to form unions in order to improve their wages, their benefits, and their working conditions. These workers know, as I do, that union workers earn 20% more on average than non-union workers. These workers also know, as I do, that union workers have better health care benefits, better paid family and medical leave policies, are much more likely to have a pension, and are less likely to be victims of health and safety violations compared to non-union workers. At a time when 71% of the American people now approve of unions, the highest level since 1965, there has been a major revitalization of the trade union movement in this country. Between 2021 and 2022, the number of union elections taking place in America has gone up by 53%. And since 2020, workers have voted to form a union in over 70% of union elections. Rather extraordinary. And now that is the good news for those of us who understand that strong unions are a vital part of rebuilding the declining middle class in this country. That's the good news. The bad news is that in order to combat this increase in union organizing, corporations have engaged in an unprecedented level of illegal union busting activities, which takes us to the focus of today's hearings. Over the past 18 months, Starbucks has waged the most aggressive and illegal union busting campaign in the modern history of our country. That union-busting campaign has been led by Howard Schultz, the multi-billionaire founder and director of Starbucks, who is with us this morning only under the threat of subpoena. Let us be clear about the nature of Starbucks' vicious anti-union efforts. The National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, has filed over 80 complaints against Starbucks for violating federal labor law. There have been over 500 unfair labor practice charges lodged against the company, and judges have found that Starbucks broke the law 130 times across 6 states since workers began organizing in the fall of 2021. These violations include the illegal firing of more than a dozen Starbucks workers for the crime of exercising their right to form a union and to collectively bargain for better wages, benefits, and working conditions. Since the first Starbucks union was certified more than 450 days ago in Buffalo, workers at more than 360 stores across 40 states have held union elections. 83% of these elections have resulted in a union victory, and today nearly 300 Starbucks coffee shops employing more than 7,000 workers have a union, despite Starbucks' aggressive anti-union efforts. But with nearly 300 shops voting to form a union, Starbucks has refused to sign a single first contract with the union, not a single one. Think about that. Think about a multi-billion-dollar company with unlimited resources, with all kinds of lawyers, advisors, consultants, and yet they have not yet signed one contract with any of their nearly 300 unionized shops. Just a few weeks ago, on March 1st, an administrative law judge found Starbucks guilty of, quote, egregious and widespread misconduct, end quote, which showed, quote, a general disregard for the employees' fundamental rights, end quote. In a 220-page ruling, this judge found that Starbucks illegally retaliated against employees for unionizing, promised improved pay and benefits if workers rejected the union, conducted illegal surveillance of pro-union workers, refused to hire prospective employees who supported the union, relocated union organizers to new stores, and overstaffed stores ahead of union votes, all clear violations of federal labor law. The judge also found that Starbucks, quote, widespread coercive behavior over 6 months had permeated every store in the Buffalo market, end quote. The judge ordered Starbucks to reinstate 7 workers who were wrongfully terminated, reopen a pro-union store in Buffalo that was illegally shut down, and pay, quote, reasonable consequential damages, end quote, to more than 24 Starbucks workers whose rights were violated by the company. And let us be clear, Starbucks' egregious union-busting campaign is not limited to Buffalo. It is happening all over America. Federal courts in Tennessee and Michigan have issued emergency injunctions requiring Starbucks to reinstate workers who were illegally fired and to prohibit the coffee chain from firing workers for supporting unionization efforts in the future. In Scottsdale and Phoenix, Arizona, the NLRB has charged Starbucks with committing 8 violations of labor law when it disciplined, fired, and forced out workers because they cooperated with federal investigations. On November 30th of last year, the NLRB found that Starbucks unlawfully refused to recognize and bargain with the union at its Reserve Roastery store in Seattle. NLRB judges have found that Starbucks illegally threatened to withhold benefits, including health insurance, from pro-union workers in Denver, Overland Park, Kansas, Seattle, Washington, and Ann Arbor, Michigan. The pattern in all of these stores is clear. On one hand, we have workers making $13, $14, $15 an hour with minimal benefits, working 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week, maybe 40 hours a week, depending on a totally unpredictable schedule dictated by their managers. And these workers are out there struggling today to achieve dignity and justice on the job. That's what they are trying to do, and I applaud their efforts. And on the other hand, we have a corporation worth some $113 billion, largely controlled by an individual worth some $4 billion, who are using their unlimited resources to do everything possible, legal and illegal, to deny these workers their constitutional right to form a union. The fundamental issue we are confronting today is whether we have a system of justice that applies to all, or whether billionaires and large corporations can break the law with impunity. I have read Mr. Schultz's comments to the media, in which he expresses his strong anti-union views. As an American, Mr. Schultz is entitled to those views and any other views he holds. But even if he is a multi-billionaire and the head of a giant corporation, he is not entitled to break the law. So today I will be asking Mr. Schultz whether he will do what an administrative judge, law judge, has ordered him to do, and that is to record and distribute a 14-page notice which states that Starbucks has violated federal labor law, to inform Starbucks employees all across this country about their rights under the National Labor Relations Act, how Starbucks has violated those rights, and to assure that Starbucks will not infringe upon those rights in the future. In other words, I will be asking Mr. Schultz whether or not he intends to obey the law. Further, I will be asking Mr. Schultz another question, and that is whether or not he is prepared to promise this committee that within 14 days of this hearing, Starbucks will exchange proposals with the union, something that it has refused to do for more than 450 days, so that meaningful progress can be made to bargain a first contract in good faith. And let me conclude by saying that what is outrageous to me is not only Starbucks' anti-union activities and their willingness to break the law, it is their calculated and intentional efforts to stall, and to stall. They understand that the turnover rate at Starbucks and many other similar type companies is high. They understand that if workers do not see success in gaining a contract, they are going to get discouraged and give up the fight. At a time when we want, in this difficult time in our country, for people to stand up and fight for their rights, to try to destroy the spirit of thousands and thousands of people who are fighting for justice, that, to my mind, is unforgivable. Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. Workers have a right to organize. Now, some may disagree as to whether the protections for workers who choose to organize should also apply to workers who choose not to organize. That's my position, but examining this nuance is not an issue here. The title of today's hearing is "No Company is Above the Law, the Need to End Illegal Union Busting at Starbucks." Now, that clearly presumes that Mr. Schultz and his former employee are guilty before the allegations are fully investigated. The title suggests that this hearing is not a good faith effort to get at the facts. It's a smear campaign against an individual and a company based upon allegations that everyone knows are still under litigation. I am not here to defend Starbucks. I have my own questions about the alleged misconduct, and the law should be followed and upheld. I agree with the chair, no one is above the law. But let's not kid ourselves. This is not a fair and impartial hearing. Now, it's not surprising that Mr. Schultz was reluctant to testify. When the majority is using the title of the hearing to slander the witness we're asking to testify, it sends a signal. The majority points to claims of Starbucks misconduct filed at the National Labor Relations Board to justify today's hearing. These allegations should be addressed and they should be investigated, period. But it would be malpractice for this committee to not also acknowledge that NLRB is currently facing its own credibility crisis. The NLRB confirmed there are 4 separate allegations of NLRB employee interference, 3 in which the employer was Starbucks, pending before the board. It begs the question, are NLRB employees weaponizing the agency against American employers to benefit politically connected labor unions? The National Labor Relations Act was passed to provide an unbiased framework to review disputes between employers and employees. The NLRB carries out the law and is required to protect the rights of all parties in a labor dispute, not put their thumb on the scale in favor of unions. But that is not what we appear to be seeing in practice. An NLRB hearing officer recently substantiated reports of voting irregularities in a union election at a Starbucks in Kansas that could potentially elevate to the level of misconduct by NLRB employees. This includes NLRB staff providing duplicate ballots, supplying union organizers with confidential voter information, providing voter accommodations to employees selected by the union without offering them to all employees. Regardless of the outcome, these actions are in direct violation of federal law and NLRB written guidelines. Now today, we'll hear from former Congressman Bradley Byrne. He is representing the brave whistleblower who brought this misconduct and weaponization of the agency to light. He'll be able to provide more insight into how the NLRB is operating in violation of its own practices and a procedure in a way which favors labor unions. Let's be clear, and one more time, workers have a legal right to unionize. Companies cannot break the law to prevent unionization. Similarly, unions should not be allowed to intimidate workers into unionizing through coercion or by banning secret ballot elections, which the Supreme Court has stated, quote, indeed the preferred, end quote, method to gauge worker support of unionization. This is a conversation this committee can have and will continue to have. But the bottom line is that a federal agency has no right to break the law to advance a political agenda. And this should be something that our committee investigates on a bipartisan basis. If the committee is going to properly investigate concerns over labor relations at Starbucks, we should also investigate alleged misconduct of the agency that sought to influence the union representation process. At last week's hearing, I said we should thoughtfully examine legitimate policy issues, not hold show trials for public shaming. Today looks like more of what we saw last week. There are important bipartisan things the committee needs to accomplish. We need to work together on real solutions to issues facing American families, like the high cost of prescription drugs, getting Americans back to work, driving down inflation that is choking economic growth. Instead, we put CEOs on the dock, but instead of a cage in which the prisoner was formerly kept, is a desk in front of the committee where a judgment has already been made. Thank you, and I look forward to today's testimony.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. We will now turn to our witness. Mr. Howard Schultz is the former longtime Chief Executive Officer of Starbucks and a member of the Starbucks Board of Directors. Mr. Schultz, you may proceed with your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, and Senators of the committee. I'm pleased to be here this morning and tell the entrepreneurial story of Starbucks and how we have carried the American flag to 84 countries around the world. My vision for Starbucks Coffee Company has always been steeped in humanity, respect, and shared success. It's a vision that was inspired by the struggles of my father, a World War II veteran who slipped on a sheet of ice in 1960 and was promptly fired from his job as a delivery driver. It fractured our family, and it deeply scarred me. I decided at an early age that if I was ever in a position to run a business, it would be based on respect and shared success. With my one-year term as Starbucks interim CEO having come to a close, I appear before you today with love and gratitude for what we have built at Starbucks over these last 40 years. The essential operating approach at Starbucks since 1987, when we had just 11 stores, has focused on values-based decisions. We've always believed that if we exceed the expectations of our people, they in turn will exceed the expectations of our customers. We call our employees partners. This is a very important point to share with the committee, because since 1991, we established shared ownership for every single person at Starbucks, full and part-time. Unprecedented. More than 30 years ago, before the company's IPO, Starbucks created 2 unprecedented benefits for our partners. It was the first of its kind in all of American business, never done before. Starbucks Beanstalk program, a stock equity program, and access to health care almost 25 years before the Affordable Care Act for full and part-time workers who work 20 hours a week. My written testimony has details on the benefits and opportunities we've created for our people over the past 40 years. This represents decades of work striving to build a different kind of company that lifts our customers and gives our partners a chance at a better life. According to Aon, one of the most respected benefits and HR consultancies in the country, this is their voice, not ours. There's literally no company in our competitive set of retail that offers higher value benefits than Starbucks in the United States. And Senators, we did this by building a direct relationship with our partners, built on trust and shared success, based on a 40-year track record of benefits and actions to create opportunity. Today, baristas in our stores earn on average $17.50. Respectfully, that's more than the minimum wage of every senator that's represented a state on this committee, including, respectfully, Chairman Sanders, where the minimum wage in Vermont is $13.18. We're at $17.50. With benefits and other income included, such as 100% paid college tuition, the first of its kind in American business, comprehensive health insurance, and Beanstalk equity, the average value approaches $27 an hour. And what I'm most proud of is today 63% of our retail managers started out as hourly baristas, underscoring the opportunity we provide for shared growth and success, and our employee retention is twice the industry average. Let me repeat. Employee retention at Starbucks is twice the industry average. And throughout our history, we have addressed the issues most critical and most important to our people, including pay equity, paid sick leave, fully paid parental leave, support of our partner networks, financial literacy, sustainability, hiring military veterans and their spouses, over 30,000 to date, partnering on food security, and offering industry-leading mental health support. The vision and track record and ongoing pathway for employees has led our industry. A small number of our partners, about 1%, have chosen a different approach, as is their right under law. And while we care deeply about each and every one of our partners, we are limited by law in what we can unilaterally do in union environments. We are 100% committed to fulfilling our obligations as an employer under the National Labor Relations Act, and are committed to good faith negotiations on first contracts for each unionized store. A year ago, I came back to Starbucks as interim CEO and concluded that assignment last week. While not a one-year fix, we are back on the right path and have demonstrated that by $1.4 billion of employee-facing investments that we made this year. Every day, we wake up thinking about how we can put our people first, put them in a position to win, and do everything we can to demonstrate the conscience, the heart, and the values of Starbucks Coffee Company. That has been the Starbucks way for the last 40 years, since 1987 when we had 11 stores and 100 employees. With that, I welcome your questions.
Mr. Schultz, thank you very much. My time is limited, as is the time of all of our members here. So I'm going to be asking you to respond to each question as briefly as you can, hopefully with a yes or a no. Do you understand that in America, workers have a fundamental right to join a union and collectively bargain to improve wages, benefits, and working conditions? Do you understand that?
I understand, and we respect the right of every partner who wears a green apron, whether they choose to join a union or not.
Are you aware that NLRB judges have ruled that Starbucks violated federal labor law over 100 times during the past 18 months, far more than any other corporation in America?
Sir, Starbucks Coffee Company unequivocally, and let me set the tone for this very early on, has not broken the law.
Okay. Are you aware that on March 1st, 2023, an administrative law judge found Starbucks guilty of, quote, egregious and widespread misconduct, end quote, widespread coercive behavior, and showed, quote, a general disregard for the employees' fundamental rights, end quote, in a union organizing campaign that started in Buffalo, New York in 2021. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware that those are allegations, and Congress has created a process that we are following, and we're confident that those allegations will be proven false.
All right. Mr. Schultz, before answering the following questions, let me remind you that federal law at 18 U.S. Code Section 1001 prohibits knowingly and willfully making any fraudulent statement.
I understand that.
Were you ever informed of or involved in a decision to fire a worker who was part of a union organizing drive?
I was not.
Were you ever informed of or involved in a decision to discipline a worker in any way who was part of a union organizing drive?
I was not.
Have you ever threatened, coerced, or intimidated a worker for supporting a union?
I've had conversations that could have been interpreted in a different way than I intended. That's up to the person who received the information that I spoke to him about.
Were you informed of or involved in the decision to withhold benefits from Starbucks workers in unionized stores, including higher pay and faster sick time accrual?
My understanding, when we created the benefits in May, 1 month after I returned as CEO, my understanding was under the law, we did not have the unilateral right to provide those benefits to employees who were interested in joining a union.
Am I hearing you say that you were involved in the decision to withhold benefits from Starbucks workers in unionized stores? Is that what I'm hearing?
It was my understanding that we could not provide those benefits under the law.
Mr. Schultz, have you ever asked the Starbucks worker, quote, if you hate Starbucks so much, why don't you go work somewhere else?
I'm glad you asked that question because I've read in the press that quote, and that's not exactly what I said. Can I tell the story? Do you mind?
I have some other questions. I'm sorry. There are a lot of people.
I think it's important to hear the facts.
All right, you'll have your chance. Will you commit to testifying in any trial where you personally are accused of breaking federal labor law, something that you have been accused of doing nearly 100 times since 2021?
Mr. Chairman, let me say under oath, these are allegations and Starbucks has not broken the law.
Okay. Mr. Schultz, were you informed of or involved in the decision to close all Buffalo area stores in November 2021, just days before area union elections, in order for Starbucks employees to listen to you give a speech on why they should vote against forming a union a meeting the NLRB has determined was a violation of the law?
I think this is another area that I hope I get a chance to speak about. For the last 12 months, my involvement, my engagement, and my return to Starbucks has been primarily, I would say 95%, focused on the operations of our business, the customer, domestically and around the world. My involvement and engagement in union activities, despite this event today, has been de minimis. I was not involved in any issue of closing stores.
Are you aware, Mr. Schultz, that an administrative law judge ordered you to record and distribute a video of yourself reading a notice to Starbucks employees about their rights under the National Labor Relations Act, how Starbucks violated those rights, and to assure that Starbucks will not infringe upon those rights in the future, and that this notice must be posted in all Starbucks stores and shared digitally to all of Starbucks employees? Are you prepared to read that notice?
No, I am not, because Starbucks Coffee Company did not break the law.
Under your leadership, Starbucks has repeatedly refused to bargain with any of the 7,000 workers in nearly 300 stores where workers have voted to represent themselves through a union. The first group of workers to win their election have been waiting more than 460 days to reach a first contract. Mr. Schultz, will you commit right now that within 14 days of this hearing, Starbucks will exchange proposals with the union, something it has refused to do for more than 450 days, so that meaningful progress can be made to bargain a first contract in good faith? Will you make that commitment?
Because the arrangement that was made by the union and the NLRB in Buffalo to negotiate one single store at a time, we have met over 85 times for a single store. We've tried to arrange over 350 separate meetings. We've said publicly, and I say it here again, that we believe that face-to-face negotiations is the way to proceed. And the reason I want to make that point is that there have been safety issues in which Starbucks managers have been outed on social media. There are privacy issues. We don't want to do it on Zoom. We are prepared to meet face-to-face on a single store issue.
Will you make a promise to this committee that you will exchange proposals with the union so that we can begin to make meaningful progress?
On a single store basis, we will continue to negotiate in good faith. That's what we'll do.
2 minutes over.
Senator Cassidy.
I defer to Senator Paul.
Ayn Rand's Howard Schultz points out the ingratitude that man has for the entrepreneur, the creator. Thousands of years ago, the first man discovered how to make fire. He was probably burnt at the stake he taught the others to light. But he left them a gift that had not been conceived, and he lifted darkness from the face of the earth. Now, Starbucks didn't exactly discover fire, but Starbucks did somehow, somewhere, discover in the depths of man's soul that he would pay as much for a double mocha latte as he once did for a week's worth of coffee. My wife Kelly and I tried to get my grandparents some fancy coffee once, and my grandfather, a survivor of the Depression, informed us in no uncertain terms that he drank Maxwell House, $3.99 for a week's worth of coffee. The Pauls, although German, often missed the zeitgeist of the times, and so while we continue to purchase Maxwell House, others, our contemporaries, bought Starbucks stock and did much better than we did. Who knew people would pay $6 for a cup of coffee? But I digress. Convincing the public to buy very expensive coffee is not the discovery of fire, but still it deserves respect. Instead, Congress convenes today not to praise Starbucks, but to bury them. The hearing today is convened to attack a private company for its success, when its success has benefited both customers and its employees alike. We've heard of the average wages, over $17. We've heard of the 401k plans. We've heard of the parental leave, even for part-time employees. Starbucks giving away tens of millions of dollars each year. They have 100% tuition and fee for a bachelor's degree. Maybe it doesn't sound like too bad a place to work. Starbucks is among the most charitable companies in the country. Since 2016, they've had a program to give away unused food to feed over 5 million hungry families. Starbucks didn't do all this under orders from a government bureau. They did it because capitalism works. We have more charity when we have more money, when we have more success, when we have more profit. Nobody buys $6 coffee in impoverished nations. We're an extraordinarily rich nation. Marion Tupy and Gail Pooley wrote a book called Superabundance. They say we live in an era of superabundance. Starbucks can only exist in an era of superabundance. The average calorie count since when I was born was about 2,800. It's gone up to 3,700. Many would argue you have too much food. You can buy 7 times as much food for the same amount of worker hours. If you measure stuff in time prices, how many hours of the average worker it takes to buy something, it's extraordinary how wealthy we are. Even in inflation-adjusted terms, from 1960 to today, 1950 to today, the average income, inflation-adjusted, is up 4-fold. These are all extraordinary tales. This is also an extraordinary tale of a company that started out of nothing and employs tens of thousands of people, all making great wages. And we're here to say as if this is like, Charles Dickens. I mean, we think it's 1812. I mean, it's an amazing success story we live in, the era of superabundance. In 1820, 96% of people lived on less than $2 a day. Adjusted for inflation, you know how much of the world lives that way? Less than 10%. Trade, capitalism, profit. People all the time are talking about, we want sustainable this and sustainable that. You know what's sustainable? Capitalism and profit and employment. You want to put all the Starbucks workers in the government dole? You want to have a government coffee company? What are we talking about here? If you don't want their coffee, be like my family and buy Maxwell House. But for goodness sakes, don't deride one of the great American success stories. This is not who we are. We are better than this. If the goal is to destroy the goose that laid the golden egg, then by all means, this hearing is a good beginning. For me, I see the fabulous success of Starbucks, and I understand that the luxury to spend an extraordinary amount of money for a cup of coffee is a testament to capitalism. It's a testament to the fact that we have enough money that we can do that. When I walk in Starbucks, I don't see billionaires buying coffee. I see everyone from top to bottom in there paying for the coffee because they've decided the quality is worth it. But I don't want to be part of any witch hunt that vilifies any American business. So count me out. Count me as one who is ecstatic that Starbucks is an American success story, and I'll have no part in trashing their success.
Thank you. Senator Hickenlooper, you have to preside soon, so you ask the first questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member. Mr. Schultz, I appreciate you coming before us, and I realize that you've spent your life creating one of the most successful brands in American history. You mentioned the long-held aspiration to make Starbucks a company that balances profitability with social conscience. And I think that brand is exceedingly attractive, especially to young people, and I think it's part of your success. I think in many ways, the ability of Starbucks to attract young workers and have them believe in the brand and the vision is a big part of that success, which I think is part of what this group believes is that the partnership between the company and the workers is a key to success for any successful company. Many folks who work at Starbucks came because they wanted a chance to work for a company that prioritizes earnings and benefits, wellness, and your testimony described in some detail that you're near the top of that ladder. But we also heard over the last few weeks from other workers, some from Colorado, who told us they came to work for the partner-centric model but were disappointed because they wanted that opportunity to be part of a union, and told us that disillusionment has been very hard for them. So I guess the question I would ask first is that appearance that so many of the employees have of that their organizing efforts are being interfered with seems at odds with the commitment to the partner model and the worker welfare. So how do you respond to those workers who appreciate the Starbucks model but would like to be able to organize with less confrontation?
Well, thank you for the question and the opportunity to answer that, without some of the propaganda that has been floating around. I've built my life trying to create a company that values every single person with dignity and respect who puts on the green apron. That has not changed as a result of 1%, 3,400 people out of 250,000 who want to join a union. We've said it publicly, we respect the law, we respect their right, and we want to treat everyone with respect and dignity. However, I have the right, and the company has the right to have a preference. And our preference is to maintain the direct relationship we've had with our employees who we call partners. And we have a track record that demonstrates the values that we have shown and the value that we have created. But we maintain a level of respect for everyone who wears the green apron.
Thank you. There's been considerable questions about the shrinking middle class. I'm not asking you to be an economist in this sense, although you clearly know more about economics than I will ever know. But when you look at the charts, and we've got a chart behind me that demonstrates that as the middle class has shrunken and as income inequality has increased dramatically, it has directly coincided with the decline in unions. And I certainly respect the desire to be directly connected with all your employees. But in many ways, that right to organize and that opportunity for people to be part of a union is a crucial building block for the middle class that I think gave this country stability that we don't see in the same way that we used to. At its core, I think union organizing is about having a greater say in their workplace. And I think everybody always wants that. Some of the studies show that entrepreneurs start new businesses not necessarily to make money, but to have someone bossing them around. So what do you say to the workers who want to join together with their peers to unionize their workplaces, despite however great Starbucks has been for them?
Yeah. I've said before, and I want to repeat it, I think unions have served an important role in American business for many years. And if you look at the 50s and the 60s, unions generally were working on behalf of people in a company where those people have not been treated fairly, where there's been, in some cases, nefarious acts by the employer taking advantage of the employee. I can only say in my own company, based on the track record that we've had, we do not believe, and it's our preference, that we are that kind of company. We treat our people fairly. We do nothing that is nefarious. We put our people first. We make decisions based on our people, and we have the track record to prove it. Starbucks is probably one of the best, if not the best, first job in America. As I said in my opening statement, 65% of baristas are now managers. I walked into a store an hour ago, just at 24th and M, just walked in, was met by a guy named Nico, never met him before. 22 years with Starbucks, and he tells me his story. He came from Senegal. He's an American citizen, started as a barista, became a manager, district manager. And the thing that he wanted me to know, this is an hour ago, is I bought a house and I have a car and I raised 2 kids because of beanstalk at Starbucks. Now you put that overall, in the last 15, 20 years, over $2 billion of equity because of beanstalk. 14% of people's
Senator
base
Hickenlooper,
pay.
your time has expired. So.
But it's an important point. $2 billion of equity because of everyone being an owner.
Senator
Starbucks has gone
Cassidy.
back to our employees. It's unprecedented. And that's why Starbucks doesn't need a union.
Senator Cassidy.
Mr. Chairman, I will respectfully notice that you took 7 minutes on yours, so Mr. Schultz should have been allowed to finish his statement.
Mr. Schultz will have as much time as he needs to respond to the questions of 15 people. Senator Cassidy.
I defer to Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cassidy. I recognize at the outset there's some irony to a non-coffee drinking Mormon conservative defending a Democrat candidate for president in perhaps one of the most liberal companies in America. That being said, I also think it's somewhat rich that that you're being grilled by people who have never had the opportunity to create a single job, and yet they believe that they know better how to do so, and what's best for the American worker, and what's best for the American economy, what's best for growth. I also think it's rich to not recognize the extraordinary conflict of interest we have, which is our Democrat colleagues overwhelmingly get their campaign funds from unions, and therefore would like to find every possible way to extend unions, even if an enterprise feels that it's in their best interest to pursue a different course. Now, I know that there are a number of reasons why you might wish not to have union organization in your various enterprises. At the same time, I agree with Senator Cassidy and with your own comments, Mr. Schultz, which is that people have a legal right to form a union. There are some employers that are not good employers, and a union is necessary to protect the rights of those individuals, and that if any enterprise, including yours, has broken the law, that it should be held accountable for having done so. At the same time, there are legitimate reasons why an enterprise might choose not to become unionized. I first would note that within your company, there are probably some stores that are union, some that are non-union. Do the non-union store employees get paid less than the union store employees?
The starting wage has been the same. The only difference is the benefits that we created in May. And my understanding under the law is that we were not allowed to provide those benefits to people who are organizing to join a union.
And so, in fact, that non-union stores are actually a little better total package than the union stores. Let me ask another question, which is make another point, and that is, I would understand why you would not want to have an adversarial relationship between the store manager and the employees that work there. I'd also understand that sometimes in some union enterprises, there are work rules that prevent someone from going from let's say, a barista to becoming a manager. And you've indicated that, if you will, career opportunities for people are enhanced when they're able to move from position to position and become a manager. Is that a concern of yours?
No, I mean, can I tell one story?
Please.
If I can? And it happens to be in the state of Vermont. And I think this is indicative of the situation that we are currently experiencing. There's 7 stores in the state of Vermont that Starbucks has. Of the 7, one of them voted to join a union. This is important fact. 21 Starbucks people, partners, work in that store. How many people do you think voted to either become a union or not a union? Take a guess.
Got me. I would presume the
Well,
majority.
I think when you hear the number, you'll understand the problem. 21 people in the store, 6 people voted. 6. 4 voted to become a union, and 2 voted for not. Now, I'm not saying why the other people didn't vote. That's up to the committee to decide. But you can imagine there's issues going on in a store like that where people work close together and influence people to do one thing versus the other. But here's the problem. Since 6 people voted to the union, of the 7 stores in Vermont, this particular store has twice the level of attrition, and the majority of the people have left the store. And the tension that exists in any store that Starbucks has, since it's individual stores voting in a small group of people, there is lots of issues that we are dealing with. And overall, in the stores that have voted for union, about 300 are twice the level of attrition that we currently have in the 99% of stores that have not voted for union. But the Vermont thing is not a proxy. The Vermont thing is exactly what's going on around the country.
Thank you. I appreciate that perspective, and would just turn to one other point, which is we talk about corporate greed all the time as if it's something brand new. Of course, profit incentive and greed has been there from the beginning of humankind. But there's also union greed. Greed exists throughout our society through various enterprises. But let me ask, your company's highly profitable. It was profitable, I presume, very early on, became profitable as time went on. Where does all that profit go? Does it go to all pay you and the senior executives? Where does the profit go of an enterprise? Did it all go out in dividends or stock buybacks? Where has your profit gone over the history of your company?
The majority of profits that Starbucks has made has gone back into infrastructure, roasting plants, $800,000 to $1 million to build a store. The profits of the company have gone back to the business. Now, what's most important, though, is when we create shareholder value, as we have for Starbucks through the years, our employees, our partners, are sharing our shared success model in that profit because everyone has been an owner. And the first day that I came back, April 4th, 2022, the first day, what did I do? The one thing that would get shareholders across the country who own Starbucks stock angry with Howard Schultz, and that is I stopped our buyback program on the first day. Our stock went down. I was not concerned about that, and I took that money and I invested it right back into our people, which resulted in higher wages 1 month after I came back. Now, that is the only evidence I have, which is the fact that my operating style, which has been 40 years,
Thank you, sir.
is to build a company that balances profitability with a level of shared success for our people. And we have the evidence to prove it, sir.
Senator Murray.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Schultz, for coming before the committee. I appreciate it. I've listened carefully, and throughout your testimony, you've made it very clear that Starbucks prefers its workers not to be unionized. But I think you know that decision is up to workers under federal law. I just have been disappointed, I have to tell you, from a number of my constituents I've been hearing from about some of the widespread anti-union efforts at Starbucks, including in Washington State, where the NLRB has certified 19 elections, as you know, at Starbucks stores. They have issued 71 complaints covering 31 unfair labor practice charges, and NLRB judges have issued 2 decisions now finding that Starbucks violated federal law. So let me just ask you a simple question. Do you agree that it is workers who get to decide whether they want a union?
Senator Murray, I agree that the person at Starbucks has the right under the law to decide whether or not they want to join a union, and Starbucks Coffee Company also has the legal right to provide a vision for our employees, which currently represent 99% of the 250,000 who wear the green apron, that our vision is a preference to maintain our direct relationship. And in terms of what you said, as I said to Chairman Sanders, those are allegations, and Starbucks Coffee Company unequivocally has not broken the law.
Let me just share with you, and I heard you answer Senator Hickenlooper with treating your employees with dignity and respect,
Yes.
which I appreciate. But I am hearing from a number of folks really troubling reports about Starbucks refusing to allow credit card tipping, cutting employee hours, holding the loss of critical benefits like health care, insurance, and gender-affirming care over the heads of employees who are trying to exercise their rights. And I've even heard reports, so you know, about uncertainty for union employees about whether or not they would receive abortion travel benefits, which all your workers receive. I'm concerned when I hear from my constituents about unfair threats of any kind or denying benefits unfairly, even when the union agrees to waive its right to bargain. I would assume you would agree that that doesn't constitute treating someone with dignity or respect if they are being threatened.
Senator Murray, you and I have known each other for quite a while, you being the senator of our home state. I think you have many times actually talked about Starbucks as a model employer in many of the meetings that you've had and speeches that you've given. I do take offense, I have to admit, because it's quite personal when you bring up things that you've heard that are not true. We have never, ever taken any benefit away, and we never would, of anyone who was interested in joining a union. We simply have said that under the law, our understanding is we did not have the right to provide incremental benefits during the bargaining process. But Howard Schultz, the leadership team of Starbucks, the board of directors, some of whom are here today, would never take benefits away of any kind of someone who was involved in trying to join a union.
Well, thank you for the answer. I'm giving you the question, so you have a right to respond. That's why I'm asking. Okay. But you should know that those are some of the things that I hear, and I wanted to hear your response.
Yeah. Okay.
And I've also heard allegations that Starbucks has interfered with employees' ability to testify, including in Seattle, where an administrative law judge found that Starbucks did that. Can you respond to that charge?
I have no knowledge of that, Senator Murray.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cassidy.
I defer to Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Schultz, thank you for being here. Thank you. I know this is pretty tough at times, but it's good to hear your side of the story. I came from the coaching profession. For years, I talked to young kids every year at the beginning of the year about they all wanted and needed something. I always told them one thing: only thing you get from me and from this country is an opportunity. And you took that opportunity and ran with it. And you've got a lot of people that work for you over the years and work for your company and their company and made something out of themselves. So thank you for that. You've been a huge idol for this country in terms of what you've done. We've heard a lot about what you give to your employees, health care and all that. I fully support unions. If people want to join a union, that's fine. I think that's what this country is about. Sounds like Starbucks employees as a whole, what we've heard so far, have had a great working environment. I understand collective bargaining processes have ongoing with almost 300 individual stores, and you have to negotiate with each one of these individuals in each store, each individual, not each store. And I know that there have been difficulties in trying to navigate these individual negotiations. I'm sure obstacles have come up that are unique to each store. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Thank you. You want to be respectful, as we all do, of requests of any employee, and you want to make sure that every person or group that you deal with feels that their rights are being respected and their voices heard. This could even include employees with specific rights and protections in workplace. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I know this has been a long process that requires considerable effort on your side to do all this. So can you speak to me about the difficulties that you've been having in bargaining processes, specifically in the unique issues that your average person might not understand?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. When Buffalo first emerged, and there was a process to try and decide whether or not we were going to negotiate per individual store or by district or region, it was the position of the union to have it one store at a time. That created significant complications and obstacles in the collective bargaining process. We now have to be put in a position to negotiate individual store, one by one, across the country, and set up individual meetings. Now, because in this process, Starbucks managers and district managers have had safety issues in which the union organizers have been at their home. They have been outed on social media that have been significant challenges for our people to maintain their personal safety. We have said we do not want these meetings to be anything but face-to-face, so we know who's in the room. We don't know if there's a Zoom meeting of who is taping the meeting, who's in the background, and who is looking in on the meeting, and whether or not they are part of the company, part of the union, or whatever. And so we have asked respectfully, we will show up as we have 85 separate times in a face-to-face meeting, and we've tried to set up over 365 meetings. It is a very difficult scheduling issue and very difficult logistics issue. And we should not be held accountable for not showing up when all we're asking for is face-to-face bargaining.
Thank you. I'd like to hear your story about your employee, if you'd tell. You got about a minute and a half. About the employee that you had the discussion.
This morning?
That you had the argument about. You might want to go
okay, thank you
for
that.
Yeah.
When I came back to Starbucks, I held about 100 co-creation collaborative meetings across the country to understand from our employees what they were experiencing and the challenges of a post-COVID environment on their life at home, on their work life, work balance, et cetera. Those meetings were not about union negotiations. In fact, we made it clear, we're not here to talk about the union, we're here to talk about Starbucks. In a meeting in Long Beach, a Starbucks partner was trying to interrupt the meeting and start talking about the union. She happened to be sitting next to me. I didn't know she was recording it, I didn't know she was filming it, but it was clear that there was a disruptive mentality. I just turned to her and I said, if you don't like the company, if you hate the company, you could work somewhere else. It was not a threat. And going back to Chairman Sanders' question before, I can understand she may have misinterpreted what I said. It wasn't a threat. I didn't know I was being filmed. I just simply said, if you hate the company, you could go work somewhere else. Those 100 sessions that I attended are based on what we've done to improve the company, to understand the empathy and compassion we need to have for our people in a post-COVID environment. They were not union meetings. They were meetings to discuss Starbucks and the opportunity for our people. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Casey.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much, and thanks for calling the hearing. Mr. Schultz, welcome, and I want to welcome the workers in this room who have had to do so much, expend so much effort over many years to have the right to organize and bargain collectively, so we stand with you in that effort. I think that's a right that every single worker in the United States of America should have, the right to bargain collectively, to organize for wages and benefits. And too often in our country, workers don't have that right. I represent a state where workers over generations marched and mobilized and literally bled and died for the right to organize. It wasn't conferred upon them by some CEO or some boss. They had to fight for it, and that resulted, of course, in the National Labor Relations Act, which is still in effect, still the law of the land, despite repeated corporate attempts to undermine it. So we have a lot to talk about, not just with regard to Starbucks, but for workers generally. I wanted to start, Mr. Schultz, with a discussion about one of the firms that Starbucks hired. I'm told that during your tenure as CEO, you hired Littler Mendelson, one of the largest and most notorious union-busting firms in the country, that reportedly charges upwards of $600 an hour for their services. It's been reported that in 2021, Starbucks shut down all stores in the Buffalo area, rented out the Hyatt Regency Hotel, flew you, Mr. Schultz, and Starbucks senior executives into town, and forced workers to hear you give anti-union talking points. While Starbucks refuses to say how much they've spent on anti-union efforts, it's clear the company is willing to spend a significant amount of money on union-busting tactics. And guess what? Under current law, federal law, Internal Revenue Service law, Starbucks is able to write off those costs as a run-of-the-mill business expense, meaning taxpayers are subsidizing union busting in the United States of America, including that of Starbucks. So, Mr. Schultz, I'd ask you, as a private citizen, in your personal capacity, do you believe that corporations should have the right to get a tax break, a taxpayer-provided subsidization, a tax break for union busting activities?
Senator Casey, you've said a number of things I'd like to respond to, but...
Well, just answer that question first.
No, I will. I mean, Starbucks Coffee Company is following the tax laws and the law that Congress has
I didn't ask you about Starbucks. I asked you about your personal view.
Yeah.
Do you think that provision should stay as the law or should be changed?
My personal view is we should follow the law that Congress has set up.
Do you support that?
I support the law.
You support the provision that allows a company to hire union-busting firms and conduct other activity that interferes with the rights of workers to organize. I understand it's the law, but you're saying you support it. You would not support a change. Is that correct?
I support the law, and I also take offense with you categorizing me or Starbucks as a union buster when that is not true.
Well, look, you go to just March of this year. Administrative law judge issued a 218-page decision finding, quote, egregious and widespread misconduct demonstrating a general disregard for the employees' fundamental rights, unquote, in Buffalo, New York. So I think there's plenty of evidence on the record in terms of what the National Labor Relations Board has set forth in their opinions and their work. Let me ask you another question before my time has expired. There have been complaints, and I want you to answer this if you know anything about it, that Starbucks is spying on its workers as they try to organize. Again, another National Labor Relations Board administrative law judge recently wrote that Starbucks used headsets headsets to, quote, closely supervise, monitor, and create the impression that employees' union activities are under surveillance. So we've heard about this with regard to other companies. Do you believe, and again, this is in your personal capacity, and you realize where you are now, do you believe that workers should have the basic dignity at work not to be surveilled by their employers?
Senator, I am incredibly proud of how we treat Starbucks partners and have since
That's fine.
1987.
I understand you're
I'm not
proud.
aware of anyone surveilling anyone at Starbucks.
You're not aware of that.
I am not.
Do you support that?
No, I would not support that.
Thank you, Mr.
Can I come back and just address something you said, if you don't mind? You talked about Buffalo. I just want to clarify. From what I understand, the activities in Buffalo began in August of 21. I was not the CEO at the time. I came back in April of 22. But I want to share with the committee what we have found out about the organizing in Buffalo. And I think this is important for everyone to know. The organizing in Buffalo began with an individual who we later found out was paid for and joined Starbucks as an employee in 2020. And even though we hired her on her own merit, we found out that she was paid for by the very union trying to organize Starbucks.
I'm going to have to cut you off. Senator.
That was a good story. We'll come back to that because it sounds like something to do.
I hope you do.
I'll defer to Senator Mark Wayne Muller.
Well, thank you. And considering the chairman doesn't want to hear any of that information, because I believe he's pretty biased in his opinion already, Mr. Schultz, I'll give you an opportunity to finish that if you'll do it quickly.
Thank you very much. So, as you might imagine, we're very curious to understand what happened in Buffalo. And we later found out that this individual, which was hired in 2020, was paid for and under the employment of the union that was basically trying to organize Starbucks. We later found out there was more than one person. And so you might want to ask yourself, where's the fairness,
Right.
the objectivity, and the integrity of what we're talking about here today?
No, and I mean, if you're anti-union as a CEO, you're anti-union busting, or you're for union busting. I'm not saying you're anti-union. I'm just saying that it seems like to me, as a former CEO, not nearly at the success that you were at, sir, and I'm not trying to defend your company because, quite frankly, politically, we're on totally different ends of the spectrum. And so the irony of this hearing is actually kind of funny. And I do want to point out some hypocrisy about this hearing with the chairman, and it's not trying to get personal. All this information is going to be very public. But the fact that you can't defend your company because you want to have a good relationship with your employees and you believe in employee value, which we all do. Any CEO knows that the success of our companies are based on our employees. We get that. But it seems like unions today, all they want to do is fight with their employees or their employer, the same employer that is hiring those team members. And that friction causes a very volatile and tough workplace. And if the company and the employees aren't in the same boat, rowing in the same direction, then neither one can be successful. And unions themselves, if you're part of a union, you can never be an executive, you can never be a manager, and never be a CEO. And if you can't be an executive or a manager or the CEO, then how are you actually going to implement the changes that the unions want in those positions to begin with? And it seems like they actually hold back their team members. Mm-hmm. But I take offense to the chairman pointing out that all CEOs are corrupt because they're millionaires. You know, if you make a lot of money, you're corrupt. Yet it's bothering to me because, Mr. Chairman, you yourself have been very successful. Rightfully so. Glad you have been. You've been in office for 28 years, and you and your wife have immersed a wealth of over $8 million. And in fact, your quote on being wealthy and being a millionaire was, well, if you write a bestseller, you can be a millionaire too. If you can be a millionaire, why can't Mr. Schultz and other CEOs be millionaires and be honest too? If that's the case, then why is it that Mr. Schultz, who actually creates jobs and a bestseller of a book, isn't creating any jobs? Why is it that he's corrupt and you're not? Why is it that all CEOs are corrupt because they're wealthy, and yet our chairman, who is wealthy, and I'm glad you are, you're not? Guys, the government's role is to create an environment for entrepreneurs, for go-getters, for world changers, to be successful in life. The U.S. government is designed for people that want to succeed can. We can go out and achieve anything that we choose to. But when you lean towards socialism, what you think is government is the answer, and unions are the choice. And if you're against us, then you're dead wrong and you must be corrupt. That's not the world we're living in. That's not the America that we believe in. And I'm not against unions. If you want to choose to be in a union, be in a union. But if you choose not to, then you choose not to. And that's why I'm good with right-to-work states. That's honestly why unions actually thrive in Oklahoma, and we're right-to-work states, because it creates a happy environment and a good environment, because employees get to choose what they want to be part of. And the employer can have a say in it. What is wrong with choice? What is wrong with employees having a choice? What is wrong with the CEO defending his company and openly saying that he is providing good benefits and paying higher than everybody else? But yet, if you're not part of a union, you're also paying starvation wages. What hypocrisy? What bias? Chairman, you are chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. We shouldn't have a biased approach. We should have what's best for America and all those that want to thrive and work in it. And so while we politically disagree, Mr. Schultz, I applaud you for your success. And I applaud all the CEOs out there for their success and all the employees that work hard, that's in the same boat, that's making their companies great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, let me respond. The senator did mention my name, I think. And I think you got an all-time record here. You've made more misstatements in a shorter period of time than I have ever heard.
Please correct me.
Well, if I'm
because
worth
it's all
$8 million,
public.
excuse me.
It's all public.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right? Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
If I'm worth $8 million, that's good news to me. I'm not aware of it. That's a lie. All right? Number two.
Part of public records.
You're probably looking at some phony right-wing internet stuff. It ain't true.
No,
All right? You should read beyond that. It is not true.
it's
All
part of public records.
No, it is not public record.
Okay. Well, you made
It is not
$1.7 million on your book.
public record.
You made
All right? It is-
1.7 on your book.
Excuse me. I've got the mic now. Number
you not
two,
make the statement
I
that if
have
you want to
the
be a
mic
millionaire?
now. I've got it.
Did you
had
not
your
make
time.
that statement?
You had your time.
Okay.
All right? You're not telling the truth. Second of all, you got no evidence that I have ever said that all CEOs are corrupt. I have never, ever said that.
Probably not all, but every time you talk
probably
about
not, then
CEOs, you do
shouldn't
say that.
Say it. Furthermore, what this hearing is about is whether or not you talk about being pro-union. Really, what this hearing is about is whether workers have the constitutional right to form a union. The evidence is overwhelming, not from me, but from the National Labor Relations Board, is that time after time after time, despite what Mr. Schultz is saying, Starbucks has broken the law and has prevented workers from joining unions to collectively bargain for decent wages and benefits. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schultz, I want to begin by acknowledging the leadership role your company has played in providing benefits to workers. You talked about it in your testimony with great pride, comprehensive health benefits to full and part-time employees starting in 1988, and stock awards to all employees since 1991. You noted, I think, that these benefits allow you to attract and retain a workforce that you call the secret sauce of the Starbucks success. Given this history, though, it is all the more puzzling to me that you're fighting this union drive so fiercely. You've said that a union will sever the direct relationship you have with employees, which you call crucial to anticipating their needs. Instead of leaving it up to your anticipation, a union can ensure that you receive clear feedback about what your workers actually need, free from fear of retaliation. While you call them partners, your workers are limited in their ability to engage with you directly because there's a power differential, and you have power over them and the benefits that they cherish. A power you have shown your willingness to wield, involving employees attempting to organize. I find it particularly ironic, especially given your own powerful story, that you don't see this power dynamic. Further, I think this number is right for your U.S. employee base, but you employ over 235,000 people, in over 3,000 in my home state of Wisconsin alone. You can't possibly have a direct relationship with all of them. Some intermediary is necessary. If you truly want a direct relationship with your workforce, I would suggest to you that a union can provide that. I also want to note in your written testimony that you returned to Starbucks in April of last year and noted that the company had gone astray, had lost its way on many levels. You talked about short-termism, an issue on which I agree profoundly. And who were these partners to turn to with this direct relationship during this time that the company had gone astray? In Wisconsin, when I met with Starbucks union organizers, it was immediately clear to me that they take significant pride in their work. You talked a little back and forth about the quote of hating Starbucks so much, why don't you quit or get a job somewhere else? These workers don't want to quit. They want to work. In fact, they seem to share so many of the same goals for the company that you've laid out so eloquently in your testimony. All of these workers are asking is that you respect their right to organize, which would require you to treat them not just as partners, but as equals. It's that power dynamic that I was talking about. So on that note, Mr. Schultz, it has been almost 1 year since the first Wisconsin store voted to unionize. I want to ask you on the record when Starbucks will begin bargaining in earnest with those workers, and when can I expect that I'll hear that the first contract has been signed?
I'd love to answer your question. I wonder if I can have more time to respond to some of the things you've said. But we are prepared in the state of Wisconsin and other states that we have partners who want to join a union to meet face-to-face, as we've stated consistently, and begin a bargaining process. And we're prepared to do that in Wisconsin. Mr. Chairman, I wonder if I could just speak to a few things that the Senator had mentioned.
You have about 50 seconds.
Okay. Starbucks has had almost 5 million people wear the green apron. 5 million. So we've created close to 5 million jobs. 5 million jobs. Just think about how many families have benefited from Starbucks. The majority of those partners have participated in an equity plan unprecedented in American business. 14% of their base pay is how we started. In addition to that, 99% of the 350,000 who work for Starbucks want a direct relationship with the company. In addition to that, what's the most important metric of any business? And that is trust with your people. And as a result of that,
I'm sorry.
we have the highest level of retention of any company in our sector. That's hundreds of companies, the highest level of retention.
Mr. Schultz, there are time limits here. Senator Cassidy.
I defer to Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member. I think this is an interesting discussion because I've recently come from the world of building a business over 37 years, and I've been clear when it comes to unions, they are so important in today's world vis-a-vis large public companies, multinationals. How would you have any countervailing clout unless you didn't have an effective union? I think this is interesting because the restaurant business, I think currently has maybe 3 to 4% of it unionized. And one of the reasons, since I had a small business for 17 years, 15 employees, before it grew. And the best avoidance of a union is to treat your employees like family, pay good wages, have good benefits. You do that, you're probably never going to have a union knocking at your door. But we're talking about an industry here that through COVID went through one of the most traumatic events any small enterprise or business has gone through. This is not a small enterprise or business, but it's in a business. It's got a high fatality rate due to the nature of it. I don't know currently what you're paying your average employee on the line. That's going to be the first question, and then what the average pay of senior, middle management, senior management would be. I always thought it was good, as long as you're earning equity in whatever you're doing, that you probably be reasonable there. Don't pull in with a Maserati and all of that. I'd love to know where you're at on that wage stratification first.
Thank you, Senator. The average wage is $17.50. That's higher than the minimum wage of every state in America. With benefits, and the majority of our people take the benefits, that's at $27 an hour. 65% of our managers across the country were baristas, and all in, the manager's salary is about $80,000.
Very good. And then do you have a stratum of management above that?
Is a district manager, regional manager, and I think what we're most proud of is that the majority of people who are managing stores, managing districts, managing regions, started out in our stores. We have hundreds, maybe thousands of beautiful stories that our partners have shared with us about what Starbucks has done for them and their families as a result of the benefits that we created. And those benefits were not created because there was a union. Those were created because of the decisions.
And I think that's important to note. But I think what you represent here is a watershed case because you're large. You generally get large because you're successful along the way. And we've got to be careful because I'm going to pivot to something the other side of the aisle has proposed, is like the PRO Act. And again, I'm probably the most outspoken Republican on the benefit of unions. But you got to be careful where they go. If they're going into the gig economy, into the independent contractors, which is the next chapter on some of this, that will stifle entrepreneurialism. When you look at, if you are large, you shouldn't necessarily be held to account unless there are things that you're doing to impede the law in terms of unionizing. You've already made that point that you don't think you've been doing it. All I'm saying, this is important because this will have a ripple effect way beyond your business. And the one thing we can't have is to suffocate what's made this country great, and that is that you do not necessarily have to wrestle with a union if you do all the things that are good for your employees to begin with. Can you honestly say that you've done that throughout the history of your company, and that I know you have mobility? It sounds like several different ways you can grow. You have no mobility unless you're growing as a company, but have you honestly done that?
Yes, we have, sir, and I wonder if I could just give you one prime example that I think the committee should understand. You know, during COVID, as you said, the restaurant industry was really plummeted. I mean, we had it very, very tough. We had thousands of Starbucks stores closed. Many of our peers started cutting benefits during COVID. Starbucks did not cut one benefit during COVID, and we paid every single partner during COVID with no exception.
What was your average wage before COVID? Because you said you're at about $17 now starting. Did you have to raise it over the last couple of years?
We raised wages in May, that's correct.
And what was it before?
About $15 an hour, we went to 17.
And one final point, even $17 an hour, that's not a living wage in this day and age. I'm proud that in our company, we pay the highest starting wage in a low unemployment county. In any large corporation, shouldn't necessarily be bragging about $15 to $20 wages. When you look at the typical structure of a large company, that should probably be $20 plus, like many Main Street businesses pay. And I think if companies like yours and the larger companies don't do it, you're going to be constantly, grappling with maybe here. But on the other hand, unions shouldn't be trying to get involved in companies that are doing a good job, especially Main Street and smaller ones. I wish we had more time.
Thank you.
We'll leave it at that.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, or good morning, I think it is still. Mr. Schultz, you repeatedly call your employees partners. Do you value your employees or your partners that want to join a union or have joined a union? Do you value them as much as you value those that have not yet joined a union?
We have respect for every single partner who wears a green apron, regardless of their choice to go for a union.
So yesterday, I had the opportunity to meet with some unionized Starbucks workers from Minnesota, Gracie and Elizabeth, and they tell me that Starbucks is cutting their weekly hours. They estimate that they're losing $4 an hour in wages because the company won't allow them in unionized stores to access credit card tipping when that's available to workers in non-unionized shops. And they tell me that they are simultaneously understaffed in their stores and unable to get enough hours to pay their bills. If these folks are your partners, why are you treating them differently than the non-unionized workers?
When we raised wages in May, my understanding was that under the law, we did not have the unilateral right to provide those benefits to partners who were involved in collective bargaining. And that is why.
So you have said that several times during this meeting. You've said that you cannot legally provide these benefits without bargaining over them, but you know, I'm sure, that the union has specifically stated in this letter, July 15th, 2022, that they waived any objection to bargaining on this. It says in the letter, to this end, the union hereby waives any objection that we might have to Starbucks providing union-represented employees with any wage or benefit improvements provided to unrepresented employees. So I don't think this, I just think you're wrong.
Oh, let me try and explain. There are an array of wages and benefits that need to be negotiated in the collective bargaining process. It would not be proper to take one piece of the puzzle out of the negotiating process, since the people who have joined the union have decided that they want to negotiate a contract. It is our preference and our right to negotiate that contract fairly and objectively, but not in piecemeal.
Yep. So I think that the way the law reads is that there is an exception to that requirement to negotiate when the employees make a clear and unmistakable waiver to bargaining. But let me ask you about this, because the first Minnesota store union was certified over 320 days ago, and no meaningful bargaining has happened since then, though there have been some meetings. Do you know how long those meetings have been in Minnesota?
I'm not involved in any of the meetings.
So the Minnesota folks tell me that those negotiation sessions have not lasted longer than 6 minutes. So that seems to me, sir, as a failure to negotiate in good faith.
From my understanding, in many of the meetings that we've showed up to have face-to-face meetings, the other side has decided to put on a Zoom or a Teams, and then we decide, and we've told them up front, that we will not negotiate unless the meeting is in person and we know who's in the room. And so we have left those meetings as a result of the fact that we could not preserve the privacy and the integrity of a face-to-face meeting.
So my observation here is that this feels like sort of a catch-22, because you are not willing to bargain on issues like credit card tipping, while we are simultaneously, you're not coming together to bargain at all. And so I think that that is why the employees are feeling, who are wanting to be in a union, that feel so frustrated. But I want to just touch on one other thing. I've been listening really closely to you today, and I also come from the private sector. Had my own company at one time before I moved into the public sector, and I've been really struck by your focus on what an excellent company you are. And honestly, it sounds as if you are personally offended or even insulted that anyone would question you or your company. And it seems as if you feel that only bad companies should be unionized, that there's something nefarious about a company that is done something bad and therefore they need to be unionized, and that Starbucks doesn't need a union because you are a good company. But I think, Mr. Schultz, that is not your decision to make. And I believe that there is an inherent value in coming together to organize that would address this imbalance of power that I think the many, many Starbucks
Senator, you're
partners
right.
sitting behind you and in Minnesota feel. I mean, you're a billionaire. And they are your employees. The imbalance of power is extreme, and that is why people want to come together to form a union.
Senator, I agree with you that I do not have who can vote for a union or not, but I am the chairman, I am the CEO of the company, or I was the CEO of the company, and I have the preference and the right to communicate to our people about what it is we believe is right for Starbucks. And I want to repeat, 99% of the 250,000 want a direct relationship with the company. And the last thing you said, and it's been said many times by the chairman, I just want to make a point of that. This monarch of billionaire, let's just get at that, okay? I grew up in federally subsidized housing. Let me finish. I grew up in federally subsidized housing. My parents never owned a home. I came from nothing. I thought my entire life was based on the achievement of the American dream. Yes, I have billions of dollars. I earned it. No one gave it to me. And I've shared it constantly with the people of Starbucks. And so anyone who keeps labeling this billionaire thing, it's
Mr. Schultz, I don't mean to cut you off. We have time limits here, and you have the opportunity. I'm not cutting you off.
It's your moniker constantly. It's unfair.
No, it is not. You have had more time. I've been generous with the time. I'm sorry.
But, Mr. Chairman.
We have a room full of people. We have a panel to go after you. You're not the only person testifying.
Okay.
Senator Cassidy.
Defer to Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Schultz, I'm going to change the subject a little bit. Last year, your company decided to close 16 stores across the nation, including the Starbucks down the street here at Union Station, due to rising crime in these cities. Shortly thereafter, you stated that there are going to be many more closures for similar concerns. Your store managers are quoted saying that their employees have not felt safe amid a spike in crime, a surge of assaults, thefts, and drug use. I agree, in fact. In fact, I fear for my own staff walking home in this neighborhood. I feared so much that I purchased each one of them one of these noisemakers this past Christmas. One of our colleagues' office staff was recently violently assaulted as well. The lawlessness in this country is out of control. When you decided to close those 16 stores because you feared for your employees' safety, did you then, and do you still believe that the White House needs to focus on restoring law and order and relaying a message to this country of respect for the brave men and women in law enforcement in this country?
Thank you, Senator. We do, in fact, have a significant issue of safety in urban cities around America. And Starbucks has closed many, many stores that were profitable as a result of the fact that our own people do not feel safe working in the stores. And we have a situation of homelessness, drugs, mental illness, and as a result of that, many of the societal issues that we're facing today are difficult for Starbucks to address because we don't have the power or the responsibility to address these things as you've described.
You know, thank you for the for your answer and your honesty. It's a sad day for this nation when the crime is so bad that you feel the need to close profitable shops because you can't keep your employees safe at their place of work. And I have to note for the record that every single location you closed, all 16 of them, were in Democrat ran cities. We have another saying, I'll change the subject here again. We have a saying back home that pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. You do have 645 unfair labor cases brought against you. Based upon the size of the crowd, there may be some smoke and fire together there. This is your chance. Tell me your side of the story. Tell me why you have so many complaints. Do you feel like that there's been a fair negotiation process? Have you and your company been open to a negotiation process? So this is, give you a minute here, a minute and a half, just to tell me your side of the story.
Thank you. First off, with regard to the NLRB, Senator Cassidy mentioned a number of issues. Starbucks Coffee Company will abide by the law and follow the process. I hope the committee does investigate many of the things that are going on within the NLRB and the courage of the whistleblower to come forward with regard to the allegations that she has, that she wants to discuss with the committee. This process, unfortunately, has played out publicly in many different ways. And unfortunately, a public company in America today is unfortunately guilty before before anything.
So this is your chance.
Yeah.
So why are you innocent?
Yeah, we're innocent because we've done everything that we possibly can to respect the right under the law of our partner's ability to join a union. But conversely, we have consistently laid out our preference without breaking any law of communicating to our people about what we believe is a vision for the company. And when I went to Buffalo, even though it was cited before by Senator Casey, I never mentioned the word union once. I talked about the vision for Starbucks. And the reason is, post-COVID, 95% of the people wearing the green apron had worked for the company less than a year. They didn't know anything about Starbucks. So I went to Buffalo to share the story of Starbucks, what we have done as a company, equity in the form of stock options, comprehensive health insurance, all the things that we've done to provide opportunity for our people. I didn't go there to talk about the union. I went there to lay out our vision for the company. And I consistently have done that, as well as the leaders of Starbucks. We have not broken the law. We have simply tried to defend ourselves and tell our employees, all of them, what we stand for, our future, the aspirations we have, the growth of the company, and the opportunity. Starbucks is, in many ways, the quintessential entrepreneurial company of the last 30 years. We've created 5 million jobs from a cup of coffee, and we've shared the profits with our people. And we've done all these things not because of the union, but because of the compassion, the empathy, and in many ways, my own story of understanding what happened to my father and trying to build the kind of company that my father never got a chance to work for. And that is the story of Starbucks.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Collective bargaining is a fundamentally conservative idea. Right? We've sort of lost track of that. I mean, it's rooted in free market principles, right? The idea that workers should be able to freely join together to negotiate in a free, open negotiation with their employer. And so it's kind of disappointing and sad and wild to me at how sort of partisan this debate has become. Democrats standing up for unions, Republicans saying they support collective bargaining, but not seeing that there's real genius in the idea in a free market society that workers get to come together. It's funny, previous Republican candidates, they really fought hard to work to win the union vote, to speak at union conventions. This sort of new dichotomy we have is, in fact, new. Mr. Schultz, what do you mean when you say that you abide by the law? So I guess when I do a search online to take a look at cases that have been brought against Starbucks for illegal firings, as you know, New York, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Kansas, Missouri, Washington, a decision out of Buffalo requiring you to reinstate workers, calling your practice egregious and calling your practices egregious and widespread in misconduct. you say you follow the law, but then, of course, this committee sees repeated evidence of NLRB orders forcing you to reverse actions that were on their face a violation of the law. So when you say you don't break the law, you abide by the law, you mean you disagree with all of these decisions from the NLRB? You think they got it wrong in all of those cases?
I think what you're talking about is allegations that we look forward to in the process to defend ourselves. But if I can give you one specific case,
but some of these are orders from NLRB judges to reinstate employees based upon violations of conduct. Do you think in all of those cases in which judges have required stores to be reopened or for workers to be reinstated, that they just all got it wrong?
Well, in Memphis as an
in every case.
So in Memphis as an example, we do have.
Well, I'm not actually looking for. I'm not. I'm not looking to litigate each specific case. Just to clarify, when you say that you are abiding by the law, you mean that in every case in which an NLRB judge has ordered you to take steps to remediate actions, in every single case they've gotten it wrong.
We will follow the law and follow the judge's order, but we look forward to
but the judge is making a finding that you have engaged in conduct that is not allowed by the underlying law, i.e. illegal behavior. In every case, you believe that the judges got it wrong.
I believe the allegations will prove that Starbucks was correct. And I can give you a perfect example if you're willing to listen.
Sure, I'm willing to listen.
Okay, so let's take Memphis, which has been a clear, isolated case, but I think indicative of the process. Safety at Starbucks is critically important. We want to protect and preserve the safety of every one of our people. In 1997, we had a tragedy in Georgetown where 3 Starbucks partners were murdered. And so as a result of that, we have always taken safety very seriously. But after that, everything we do is about partner safety. Now, in Memphis, a Starbucks person who agreed to join the union, after hours, opened up that store for activities that were not consistent with safety and procedures at Starbucks. No one should open up a store that is closed. The manager took a disciplinary approach and terminated that person. That person was reinstated. That is the fact. Safety is key at Starbucks. So we can't be held accountable for things that we believe under the procedures of Starbucks that are based on safety for our people. And that is a clear violation of our procedures.
I understand. I'm trying to square your testimony in which you insist that you rigorously follow the law.
Yes.
With overwhelming evidence from the organizations that are charged with enforcing American labor law that is not the case. It is akin to someone who has been ticketed for speeding 100 times, saying, I've never violated the law because every single time the cop got it wrong. That would not be a believable contention if someone was to make that before the committee. And so I find it hard to believe your insistence that notwithstanding this extraordinary set of decisions, reinstating workers, forcing stores to be reopened, that you are in fact consistently abiding by the law as your testimony is before this committee.
I don't believe Starbucks has broken the law.
All right, thank you.
Senator Cassidy.
Let me just make a couple of observations relative to what has been said on the other side of the aisle of the dais. First, we should have, as I mentioned earlier, an investigation as to NLRB activities. They're being made out as if they're a totally objective player in all this circumstance. But here I have a letter from NLRB confirming that the OIG is investigating allegations of misconduct by the NLRB employees in Region 14. Now, we can say, oh my gosh, NLRB is supposed to be neutral. There is tangible evidence that they're not. Secondly, I'm sorry Senator Murphy left. Republicans down here have totally supported the right of people to organize. I'll also point out that it was Republicans who were standing up for the trade unions when his first week of his presidency, Joe Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. Canceled it when those trade unions needed those jobs to make their pensions. And by the way, if I may point out, subsequently, the administration has gone hat in hand to Venezuela and the Middle East asking for more production. If they had not canceled that pipeline, that oil would now be coming down to the state of Louisiana, employing more workers in my state, refining that oil in the most environmentally sensitive way. So I kind of stand by our side. Mr. Schultz, let's explore a little bit. There's this impression that the unionization effort has occurred organically. But you mentioned earlier, and I think I have some facts here, that the person in Buffalo was making $69,000 a year when she went to work for the store and began to organize. I think that's called salting, but it wasn't as if there's this organic, let's just all come together and unionize. No, workers of the world unite. It was, no, somebody was paid to go in there and create an environment where 4 out of 6 people might do it. I don't know if that was the 4 out of 6 union. Any comments upon this person getting paid by the union when she came to your store in an attempt to organize it?
Well, if that's not a nefarious act, I don't know what is.
Yeah, it does seem just a little bit inorganic.
Yeah.
You made, or your company made in a 2023 proxy statement, that Starbucks has not been found to have violated the law as part of any enforced order of the NLRB. Now, Senator Murphy suggested that you are guilty because you've been charged, and yet you're pointing out that you've not been found to violate the law. Will you kind of reconcile those two statements?
That is correct. We have not been found guilty of any violation. These are allegations. We look forward to the process that Congress has set up, and I think we will avail ourselves that these will be proven not true.
Now, I just made the point, I forget if I requested this, but I would like to enter to the record the letter from NLRB confirming that they are being investigated for NLRB employees' misconduct in Region 14.
Without objection.
Do you have any comments upon what I feel is to be the politicalization of NLRB? From your perspective, is that a real thing?
I don't really have any comment on that. I hope the committee will look closely at it.
Okay. Now, there's been a lot made that contracts have not yet been achieved, so-called first contracts. I have something here from a Bloomberg report that it took, on average, 465 days for first contracts in a variety of industries to be achieved. More than a half took more than a full year or to sign. It's being argued that you're not negotiating in good faith because you have not yet achieved the contract. And yet that seems to be consistent with the pattern of how these first contracts come about. Is there any statement you'd like to make on that?
I think that's true. As I said earlier, we've shown up about 85 times to have a face-to-face meeting. We've tried to set up 365 additional meetings, and we are very clear. We're ready and able to have face-to-face negotiations, and we will do so at a moment's notice.
Now, NLRB's General Counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo, found that you had violated federal labor law by refusing to bargain if some attended over Zoom. I didn't realize it was a law that you had to be able to go over Zoom, but any comment upon Ms. Abruzzo, who some have found to be an advocate for unions in terms of this particular finding?
I think, I've been in business for many, many years. Face-to-face meetings, negotiations, collaborative sessions, they're all better to be had than anything that is on Zoom.
Is there a law that says that you have to do it over Zoom if one party chooses to go over Zoom?
I've never heard of that law, sir.
Okay. I haven't heard of it either. I yield.
Senator Hassan.
I'm happy to yield to Senator Markey for a minute, and then I'll follow up after him, if that works.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this important hearing. And Mr. Schultz, it's good of you to show up, but then again, you face little choice. It's disappointing to me that it took such a long time and required the threat of a subpoena for you to appear before this committee. And it's frankly disrespectful to your hundreds of thousands of employees, but we do appreciate you finally appearing here. All across America, workers are saying that they've had enough. Rising inequality and outlandish CEO pay for those at the top, like you, and a paycheck-to-paycheck subsistence for everyone else. The unionizing Starbucks workers are on the front lines as a groundswell of working and middle-class people who are banding together to assert their right to organize, form a union, and collectively bargain for their dignity. My father used to tell me that you can't beg for your rights, you have to tell them. He lost his finger in an industrial accident as a young man. There was no OSHA. He just said, the boss said, see you next week, John, back on the job. That was before unions. That was before rights were put on the books. And ultimately, that's what Starbucks workers are doing. Workers in Buffalo are the spark that's lit the fire of organizing its locations across the country, including 15 Starbucks locations in Massachusetts. The American people are watching. Public support for unions hit a record high late last year with 71% of Americans approving of labor unions. So as you sit here denigrating your workers, you're not just morally and legally wrong, you're in the minority. You're out of touch. Union busting is disgusting. I got the chance this week to meet with Caitlin, who is a Starbucks employee from Gardner, Massachusetts. Like you, Caitlin cares deeply about Starbucks. She originally started working for the company in 2006 and came back to rejoin Starbucks in 2021. When she came back, she saw Starbucks similar to how you describe it in your testimony, a company that had lost its way. She saw a company that now only cared about money at the expense of the health and well-being of its workers. So to help save the Starbucks she once knew and loved, Caitlin and her co-workers formed a union. They wanted to revive a wayward company, make your company better. But you vilify Caitlin and her colleagues for caring. You demonize them for participating in their fundamental right to organize. And worse, you and your company set out to punish Caitlin and her colleagues, withholding benefits and raises, cutting hours, and purposefully understaffing to harm their most dedicated partners. So when you give us 10 pages of testimony extolling the benefits that Starbucks offers its employees, that's not what I see. I see Caitlin. I see you squeezing the people who have made you rich with blatant disregard for the law, perhaps because you think if you can hire the lawyers and pay the union-busting consulting firms, you can get away with violating other people's rights, with disregarding their dignity, and with silencing working people in America. But here's the thing. If you can pay the lawyers and the consultants and the PR specialists, you can also pay the workers a fair wage. So you say that your father was unfairly fired after he was injured on the job. Your father had no rights, and your family paid the price. That is how your workers now feel. They have no rights. They don't want to be like your father, who had no rights. They don't want their families to have to pay the price for their children the way your father had to pay a price for his children. They want rights. Your father couldn't protect himself. That's all your workers are looking for, so they can protect themselves and their families so that what happened to your family does not happen to their family. I don't think you understand that, Mr. Schultz. They're just looking to be someone who can protect themselves in a way your father could not. So, Mr. Schultz, I would just hope that you would understand that. But I'm afraid you don't. I'm afraid that if you step down as CEO, that you don't understand that these people are afraid that your company will lose its way again, and that they need rights that don't just come from you, but come from the company. That's what they're looking for. It lost its way, you say you're back, but it could lose its way again. Workers should not be dependent upon you, Mr. Schultz, and your sense of right and wrong. They should be able to have laws, protections, unions that stand up for them every single day of the year. And that is something I think, Mr. Schultz, that you just fundamentally don't understand. these workers are just like your father, and they have no rights.
Can I respond, sir?
30 seconds.
Only 30 seconds. I need more time for that.
Well, I'm sorry, that's
You
all.
bring up my
Every
father.
member here is.
Bring up my father. You don't understand, sir. My father was a World War II veteran, fought for this country in the South Pacific. You don't understand.
I understand
Yeah, let
completely.
me-
Your
let me-
father
Yeah.
was.
Can I finish, sir?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Your father served our country, and then the company he worked for.
Can I respond, Chairman?
Yes.
Please.
Okay. I don't understand. Let me ask you a question, since you cited the union as the answer. Is there a union contract that you personally are aware of that provides comprehensive health insurance, equity in the form of stock option, free college tuition? Is there at $17.50 and an average of $27 with benefits? Are you aware of a union contract? Sir, answer the question. Of a union contract that has those benefits, sir?
Mr. Schultz.
Are you aware?
Mr. Schultz, here's your testimony.
No,
Looking
I'm asking
back,
you a question.
looking back,
Oh,
it is-
Mr.
it-
Mr.
looking
Schultz.
back, it is
Asking you a
clear
question.
to prior to my return last April, the company had lost its
I
way.
asked you a
That it had
question.
fallen under the dangerous influence
I
of Wall
asked you a
Street
simple question, just like you asked me.
short-termism that I had always tried to.
I asked you a question, sir.
Sir,
You don't understand.
Your testimony says that your own company lost its way, and it will lose its way again unless there's a
Okay.
union there
In a
to make
Senator
it
Hassan,
accountable.
thank you.
And
Senator
in a
Hassan.
post-COVID environment, many
All right,
companies.
Mr.
have
Schultz,
tremendous
Mr.
difficulty.
Schultz. Senator Hassan, please.
You don't understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for holding this hearing today to discuss reports of illegal union busting at Starbucks locations across the country. So in New England alone, there are 19 unionized Starbucks stores, and a total of 8 unfair labor practice violations have been filed by the workers' union. So it is absolutely critical that we hold companies accountable when they fail to comply with federal labor law. Mr. Schultz, I am seriously concerned by reports that Starbucks is coercing and retaliating against workers for exercising their rights to organize. For example, by unjustly firing workers who are involved in union organizing, conducting surveillance of union organizers, and reducing their work hours. Until 2 weeks ago, you were the CEO of Starbucks, and you continue to be a member of the board of directors as well as a major shareholder. So, what I want to know is this. I know that Senator Casey asked you about reports that Starbucks was surveilling workers who were engaged in organizing. Do you have any knowledge that such surveillance took place?
I had no knowledge of that, sir.
Who decided to move these workers to other locations, the workers who were engaged in organizing, or to reduce their hours or fire them?
I'm unaware of that.
So you had no participation in decisions about moving workers who were engaged in organizing?
I had no involvement in any specific issue that regards a union in a district or a store, no.
Were you or your successor involved in any of these decisions? I'm just asking again.
No, no.
Mr. Schultz, the National Labor Relations Board has filed over 80 complaints against Starbucks for this kind of activity that I just asked you about. Starbucks leadership really needs to end these practices. You've said you don't know anything about them. You've also, as you discussed with Senator Markey, indicated in the past that you came back because you felt the company had lost its way. So I will just add my my concern about these reports of these activities and urge you as a board member to take action to make sure that the rights of workers who are engaged in organizing activity are protected. Now, as you know, the National Labor Relations Act requires an employer to bargain collectively with its employees' union representatives. It has been more than 450 days since the first Starbucks union was established, yet there has been little evidence of good faith negotiations between Starbucks and its union. The delay is truly unacceptable. As CEO of Starbucks, what exactly did you do to move union negotiations along in a timely way?
We said consistently, Senator, that we are prepared to have collective bargaining sessions when they are face-to-face, and we are ready, willing, and able.
Well, The record to date is unacceptable, 450 days. What will you do as someone who continues to serve on the company's board of directors to remedy the situation?
We want to have these meetings. We've scheduled 85. We've been to 85. We've tried to schedule 365, and we're ready to do that.
And my understanding is that on multiple occasions after you schedule them, the company cancels them at the last minute. And I would suggest to you that that is not acceptable. The facts really do speak for themselves on this issue. Starbucks is an outlier here, so you need to quickly shift course and negotiate with your unionized workers. Earlier this month, this committee heard from labor leaders about employers across the country who partner with unions to achieve better outcomes for their companies and the economy. For example, the president of the Teamsters spoke about how they've partnered with United Airlines to build out an apprenticeship program that would create 1,000 good-paying middle-class jobs. Knowing that other large companies successfully collaborate with unions, why has Starbucks not done more to collaborate with its workers' unions?
I don't think that's true.
Well, failing to reach a contract over 450, this time period between request to organize and getting contracts done indicates that you are resisting unionization as opposed to working with the union and then collaborating with it.
Senator, we respect the right of every person who wears a green apron if they want to join a union, but we also have the right to communicate to the 99%, 350,000 people who want a direct relationship with the company.
So my question is, why not work with the union and collaborate? And why not get the input from the unions to actually improve things for workers?
Well, we've sat down 85 times to have those meetings, and we hope to have some more.
So again, I will just urge you, there are lots of examples of large employers who work well with their unions, and they actually find that their business does better when they negotiate with unions, reach contracts, and collaborate with those unions. So I would urge you to take that approach. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schultz, thank you for being here today. I have a series of questions. Some of them are yes or no's, and I hope to be able to cover a lot of ground here if it's possible. Mr. Schultz, yes or no, does Starbucks provide employees with generous benefits like health care, paid parental leave, and college scholarships?
Yes.
And you're proud that Starbucks does that?
Very proud.
I understand that part-time employees need to work at least 240 hours over the course of 3 consecutive months, or roughly 20 hours a week, to be eligible for those benefits. Is that true?
I'm not sure that's correct, sir. I'd have to get back to you. I don't think that's correct.
I don't want to ask one of your lawyers. I believe that to be true.
Okay.
I see a lot of head nodding from employees behind you. But nonetheless, I can submit a question to the record so that you can definitively say yes or no to that. Mr. Schultz, what happens if workers' hours fall below a threshold, as I suggested? Are you able to answer that question to their benefits?
I think their benefits would be in question, and the manager would try and get their schedule up so they don't lose their benefits.
So I understand that Starbucks has a widespread pattern of reducing worker hours in stores that have unionized. After conversations with constituents from New Mexico, that's what I've learned. And why does Starbucks reduce workers' hours at unionized stores?
I'm not aware we do that, sir.
No, they won't believe. Mr. Schultz, you announced in May 2022 that the company would raise pay and double training hours at its more than 10,000 corporate-owned stores, but you said that these changes and others would not apply to unionized stores or stores where workers had filed for union elections. Mr. Schultz, yes or no, did you say this?
Yes. My understanding was that we were not allowed under the law to provide benefits unilaterally to stores and partners that were involved in unions.
Was there a finding at the NLRB along these lines as well?
I'm unaware of that.
Related to that statement?
I'm unaware of that.
And yes or no, do you claim that Starbucks cannot make changes to benefits without good faith collective bargaining?
That is my understanding.
The National Labor Relations Board requires an employer and the union to bargain in good faith about wages, hours, and other terms of employment until they agree on a labor contract, not after. Are you familiar with that?
Yes?
And yes or no, just so that I understand correctly, is it true that Starbucks can hold shareholder meetings virtually, but it refuses to allow some union members to join bargaining negotiations virtually, even if other members are present?
That's correct.
The reason that I asked the question about the reduction in hours, Mr. Schultz, is I certainly commend and appreciate what decisions were made about respecting employees, about valuing employees as well. What concerns me is practices that have been shared with me where a reduction in hours, where an employee maybe once worked full-time, 36 hours or so, but then hours were changed at that property for whatever reasons. I'll suggest that I believe it's because of unionization, and I look forward to getting your response there. But then the employees, I'm told, have to be on call or made available if Starbucks decides to add a shift or something. Is that true?
Sir, I'm unaware of a specific store or situation in New Mexico. I'm sorry.
I'm not asking about a specific store.
Yeah.
Starbucks across the country, in many properties, has reduced hours of employees. That's a fact. Is that correct?
For union workers?
For anyone. They've reduced hours.
We adjust the schedule based on our business.
When someone hours are reduced, if it's for business, does Starbucks have a policy where that employee has to make themselves available if Starbucks decides to call them back in for a shift that they're not scheduled for? Your head nod indicates a yes. I believe the answer would be yes.
Let me try and answer that. The manager and the assistant manager works very closely with the people in the store to adjust hours to accommodate people's work-life balance as much as we possibly can.
Okay, well, that's not my understanding. I'd be happy to submit something into the record. Okay. My concern is this. If a store changes its hours, reduces its open hours, staff's schedules are changed, they're reduced from 36 hours to 20 hours, but they're told they need to stay available, well, how do they get another job? If they can't get another job and they're trying to go to school or do something to broaden whatever they're doing in their lives, but then a policy is put in place that says, no, we're going to reduce your hours and you have to stay on call. Whether it's a manager or not, that's a Starbucks policy. I just hope with all of this, that's not a policy. Well, we'd be happy to pull you in to visit with folks from New Mexico and review some of those areas as well that I've been taught from others. So I look forward to that as well. What I hope that can be done here in all of this, look, there's a lot of interest, there's cameras outside and all the rest. Mr. Schultz, this company started in a strong way with what it did with its anchor stores out in Seattle and around Washington. You know, there's the NLRB case where they got closed, and there's allegations that they've got to open up again, or I don't know, and they're being appealed. So I don't want to get into all of that stuff. But going to what Mr. Markey said, with testimony that we lost our way,
I want to be here when the panel.
I certainly hope that we can find that way back, because a lot of folks support Starbucks because the employees were treated well. And I just hope that that's something that we can work on together, but I look forward to following up with your staff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Then I'm incredibly proud of the long-term track record.
Mr. Chairman, if I can't speak any longer, I didn't ask a question to Mr. Schultz. I'd be happy to ask a question if you'd like a response.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. What we're going to do is we have a wonderful panel that's going to be up here in a second. You have not voted yet, and I have not voted yet.
Mr. Chair, but
yeah.
Just for 30 seconds, can I be recognized to submit a letter into the record from the Albuquerque store that sent it to Mr. Schultz?
Without objection. Let me conclude this session with Mr. Schultz in saying that we are looking at a situation where one side has all the money, has all the power, has all the consultants, can hire and fire at will. We're looking at another side where workers are making not very good wages, wages that were forced up, as I understand it, by the threat of unionization, so that you now have a $15 an hour minimum wage. We're looking at a situation that Senator Lujan just mentioned. You know, we're in a lovely room here. This is one world. Out there in the real world, whether it's Seattle or Vermont or wherever it is, people are given arbitrary schedules as to when they can and cannot get to work. Sometimes they're working 20 hours a week, sometimes they're working 30 hours a week. Hard to build a budget around that. But at the end of the day, this hearing is not about my best-selling book. It's not about Venezuela. And it's a good book. People should read it. But the issue is pretty simple. Workers have a right to join a union. In hundreds of shops that you control, workers have voted to join a union. There is zero union contracts. What I am not only asking you, I am urging you, is do not only the right thing, do what is legal. Sit down. Now, you've said you're prepared to sit down face to face. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Do it. Sit down in the next 2 weeks, come back to us and tell us the success that you've had in finally negotiating a first contract. That is my hope. And with that,
Do I get to say a statement?
you do.
Yes. And I would also say this hearing is about how we should have a neutral process by which NLRB is making not a thumb on the scale on the side of one side or the other, but in which they are attempting to have a neutral process. And this committee should be investigating the allegations that we have a confirmation that OIG is investigating, that there are NLRB employees who are doing precisely that. Now, we, on this side of the aisle, firmly defend the ability of people to unionize, and we have promoted policies much more favorable for unions, for example, Keystone XL Pipeline, and it absolutely has to do with the administration's desire to buy oil from Venezuela than from Canada. Why in the world that would be, I don't know. And employing American workers and American trade unions, why that would be, I don't know. But nonetheless, that's their call and that's not mine. But we should not, in this committee, presume that someone is guilty before we have done our own independent evaluation, particularly because it would depend upon an evaluation by NLRB, which we happen to know right now is under investigation for being biased.
NLRB is not under investigation for anything. All right, with that.
Their employees are.
Mr.
Their
Schultz,
employees
thank
are.
you very much for being with us. We are going to recess for 10 minutes, and then we're going to have a very excellent panel joining us. Thank you. Okay, thank you all very much for your patience. It's an important vote that we had to cast. We are now going to begin the second panel, and we're delighted to have an excellent panel, which will include Maggie Carter, Jaislyn Saxton, Sharon Block, Bradley Byrne, and Rachel Gressler. Our first witness is Maggie Carter. Ms. Carter began working at Starbucks part-time 4 years ago to get health benefits and pay while attending the University of Tennessee. Her store in Knoxville, Tennessee was the first Starbucks store in the South to unionize, and since then, Ms. Carter has helped workers at numerous other stores organize, and I'm delighted to have her here to talk about her experience. Ms. Carter, thanks for being with us. Turn the mic on and
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
So my name is Maggie Carter, and I'm a single mom to a beautiful 8-year-old boy named Colson. Being his mom is the absolute greatest gift of my life. He's why I ended up at Starbucks, the only place to offer me part-time benefits and what I thought would be flexible scheduling while in school. As a lesbian, I was also drawn to Starbucks by its reputation as a progressive employer. I started working at Starbucks in Jackson, Tennessee in May of 2019. I was paid $8.35 an hour. Then March of 2020 came, and it felt as if the world shut down, just not at Starbucks. I worked consistently from day one of the pandemic because as a single mom, I didn't have a choice. In April 2020, I told my manager I needed to move from Jackson to Knoxville. It wasn't until 2 months later she responded, telling me I had only 48 hours to decide between quitting and being rehired in Knoxville, losing all of my seniority and benefits, or taking a leave of absence without pay and crossing my fingers to see if I would be transferred to a Knoxville store. Because of COVID, the company had frozen the normally easy transfer process. I couldn't risk losing my benefits, so I chose the second option, but it meant that I went without pay for 3 months. Luckily, I was able to begin work at a Knoxville store in August 2020. The whole situation was a punch to the gut, and the emotional impact of the disrespect I felt ultimately contributed to my belief in the need to organize a union. In October of 2021, Starbucks announced that starting pay would increase to $15 an hour almost a year later. I scoured the internet searching Starbucks wages, benefits, pay increases, and I learned about Starbucks workers organizing. I shared this information with my coworkers, and we decided to stand together to file for an election on Christmas Eve. We were proud to be the first store in the South. But it wasn't without an epic fight because Starbucks resisted us every step of the way. Just 5 days after announcing our union drive, our regional director drove to our store from out of state and was working alongside my partners, attempting to make drinks. It's the first time in my entire time with the company that I've met a regional director in person. Partners suddenly started getting disciplined for minor dress code violations or being 5 or so minutes late. Every day, it felt as if there was a concerted effort to build a case against partners who showed even the smallest bit of support for the union. Days prior to ballots being mailed out for the election, managers closed our store for hour-long periods, most during peak operating times, to hold impromptu captive audience meetings. It felt like the company was suddenly paying full attention to us and were willing to throw absolutely anything at us to deter us from organizing. We won our vote 1 year ago today, March 29th, 2022. Since then, we've made every attempt to try to bargain in good faith with the company. Starbucks walked out on our store's only scheduled bargaining session after just 30 minutes. On May 3rd, the company announced that partners who were organizing or had already unionized would not receive a series of important benefit increases that non-union stores would be granted. My partners, along with thousands of partners across the country, still do not have access to these benefits, nor do we have a company that is willing to sit across the table with us and bargain for them. This is part of my store's campaign story, but if you look to the 7,500 plus members of Starbucks Workers United, you will find thousands of stories that detail similar or more grotesque accounts of Starbucks behavior during their scorched earth union busting campaign. My coworker Michelle Eisen stated it perfectly when she testified before the House. It should not take an act of bravery to ensure you have a voice at work. Dated laws allow so much room for companies to harshly assert themselves. Unequal resources combined with unbalanced power dynamics ensure that the company's voice will often be louder than the collective voice of workers. Schultz has made a career selling the idea of offering benefits to part-time workers because he wanted to operate a different kind of company. I'm a single mother working tirelessly for this company for 4 years, and I'm certainly not alone in feeling nothing but left behind during a time where everything we knew about the world was uncertain. You cannot be pro-partner and anti-union. It's well past time for the company to bargain in good faith. Help us hold them accountable. Thank you for allowing partners to have a seat at this table alongside former CEO Howard Schultz, because that is significantly more than he was willing to offer. To Starbucks' new CEO, Laxman Narasimhan, you have an opportunity to chart a different course, to truly make Starbucks the different kind of company Schultz promised but failed epically to produce. This is a chance for your company to stop its unprecedented campaign of union busting and instead partner with us, your so-called partners, and our union to build a company that truly lives up to its stated progressive values. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Our next witness is Jason Saxton, who is a former Starbucks shift supervisor. Mr. Saxton started working at Starbucks in Augusta, Georgia in 2019. He and his coworkers successfully unionized their store in April 2022, and in July 22, after a 2-day strike, he was illegally fired by Starbucks. Mr. Saxton, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. My name is Jason Saxton. I am a wrongfully fired Starbucks worker from Augusta, Georgia. I started with the company in 2019, hired on as a shift supervisor. In time, I became the go-to not only for baristas, but management as well. I was recognized for my dedication and hard work, as well as the positive and infectious energy and environment I created for partners and customers. I even won Partner of the Quarter. My time at Starbucks wasn't all bad. I met my amazing wife, who is now the mother of our 2-year-old, Ava. I got to be there for the customers who relied on us during the pandemic and support my coworkers whose families were also going through some really tough times. Being a disabled veteran with osteoarthritis of the spine from my time in the Coast Guard, I felt it was my duty to serve my country again, in order to make my workplace more equitable, but also so that my work family could have what they needed to survive. We faced many failed and broken systems working at Starbucks when we began to organize a union. We saw that Starbucks had failed at honoring its stated mission and values, so we chose to live up to them in challenging the status quo. In late 2021, when we started to hear about Starbucks workers in Buffalo organizing a union, I thought, we need this too. I reached out to Starbucks Workers United to see how we could get started organizing in our store and began talking to my coworkers. We kept organizing despite increasing retaliation and surveillance. The company sent higher-up managers to our store, and it felt like it was just to surveil us. The regional director, who drove down from Atlanta, was in our store regularly with the district manager. We were disciplined for minor things that happened in the store, like being written up for being 2 minutes late, which had never happened before. Terminations increased too. A partner who experienced sexual harassment from one of our managers was terminated after reporting it. They held captive audience meetings. They called them one-on-ones for us to have all of the facts, but the partners were outnumbered every time. In these meetings, partners were being threatened with losing their benefits if they joined the union, which made them feel intimidated and scared. In February 2022, we heard about the Memphis 7, a high-profile case of retaliation and termination against a group of mostly workers of color. Their firing had a chilling effect on me and my coworkers as we saw the company betraying the very values and mission that these Memphis workers were upholding. Despite our fears, we were inspired by the courage and power of the Memphis 7 and filed for our election a month later in March 2022. A week after we filed, they replaced a sympathetic store manager, but it backfired as more people got on board with the union. In April, our store won our election by a landslide, 26-5, despite all of the threats and intimidation. Starbucks retaliation and union busting ramped up even more after we won our election. We were constantly being watched, and managers listened in on our conversations through our headsets. Store hours were constantly changing, and hours kept getting cut. People were fired right on the shop floor. They fired 7 of our union members. 2 of them were shift supervisors. 2 partners requested medical and maternity leave. Management refused to sign off on their leave, and they were terminated. Several people quit, including my wife. Some of us were told that we should look for another job. In July, I led a 2-day unfair labor practice strike and delivered our demands. A month later, I was fired for supposedly being disruptive. I did not receive any write-up or discipline, and there was no investigation. I was fired after organizing like so many union leaders across the country. I have filed an unfair labor practice charge with the NLRB seeking to be reinstated at Starbucks. Starbucks and big corporations have a lot of power and money, and they are willing to pull out all the stops to deny workers a voice and a seat at the table in a union. That's why I'm thrilled to be here today to have witnessed firsthand Howard Schultz being held to account for his company's illegal behavior. We are coming together to demand better pay, affordable health coverage, and stronger safety procedures. I'm proud to be a leader of this new labor movement. We're taking on corporate power and fighting for all of us. One day, my daughter is going to be able to look up her dad on the internet and find out that I fought for a better future for every Starbucks worker and for all working people. And I know she'll also read that we took on one of the most powerful corporations and won. That's why I keep fighting, and that makes everything worth it.
Mr. Saxon, thank you very much. Our third witness is Sharon Block, a professor of practice and the executive director of the Center for Labor and a Just Economy at Harvard Law School. For 20 years, she has held key labor policy positions across the legislative and executive branches of federal government, including here at the Help Committee and in the NLRB. Ms. Block, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, for inviting me to testify today. It feels a little bit like coming home. I want to make clear that first that I am testifying in my personal capacity and not as a representative of Harvard Law School. In light of my long service with the NLRB, I'd like to start my testimony by recognizing the great work done by the NLRB career staff with regard to the Starbucks campaign, handling hundreds of cases over the past 18 months. I know them firsthand to be consummate professionals and dedicated public servants. Next, I'd like to address the purpose of the National Labor Relations Act so that we understand the consequences when an employer denies workers the rights guaranteed by the Act. The NLRA does not guarantee that workers will be represented by a union or that if they are so represented, that they will secure particular outcomes at the bargaining table. Instead, it guarantees to them a fair process to decide for themselves whether they want to exercise these rights. It is always the workers who make these decisions. It is not the employer's decision. So thought of in this way, you can say that the NLRA establishes the rule of law for the workplace. And so the question for this hearing is whether Starbucks respected this workplace rule of law or has undermined the ability of workers to be treated fairly in their quest to decide for themselves whether they want union representation. I'd like to make three main points in the remainder of my testimony. First, the scope of Starbucks violations alleged and found so far is beyond the scope of the anti-union campaigns that I have witnessed during my career as a labor lawyer. Second, these violations should not be understood as isolated acts, but rather should be viewed as a coordinated campaign to stifle union activity across the company. Finally, it is critical that this kind of egregious conduct is taken seriously because otherwise it will send a message to workers across the economy that their rights are as disposable as a paper Starbucks cup. First, I'll address the scope of the violations. As you have heard already, Starbucks is facing more than 500 allegations that it has violated the NLRA, and already career board agents have found merit in more than half of those charges. In addition, 4 board members from both political parties and 7 career administrative law judges have concluded that Starbucks has committed violations of the Act. While it sadly has become quite common for companies to respond hostilely and often unlawfully to organizing campaigns by their workers, I'm not aware of another company in recent years that has had this many allegations leveled against it or this many allegations found to have merit. The egregiousness of many of the violations also makes this campaign stand out. For decades, board law has deemed the firing of pro-union workers during an organizing campaign as a hallmark violation. That is, a violation that is likely to have significant impact not just on the worker who is fired, but also on the organizing rights of coworkers. Already, the General Counsel and ALJs have found more than 20 Starbucks employees have been fired because of their union activity. These discharges and other hallmark violations found is conduct that goes to the very heart of workers' rights under the Act. And in the words of the ALJ who reviewed Starbucks' anti-union campaign in Buffalo, Starbucks has engaged in egregious and widespread misconduct, demonstrating a general disregard for employees' fundamental rights. That observation leads to my second point. What has happened at Starbucks is not just a collection of individual violations. It looks more like a company campaign to stop the workers' campaign in its tracks. Each time the company commits a new violation in a new location or at a new stage in the union's campaign, it is communicating to all of its workers that the rights accorded to them by the law can be defeated, that the company has the resources, the will, and the stamina to undermine the exercise of their rights at every turn. Therefore, I'm also concerned about the wider message that Starbucks' vast anti-union campaign sends. Workers across the country, especially low-wage workers, have also been inspired by what the Starbucks baristas have achieved over the past 18 months. But what do these workers and the public think when they see that Starbucks is willing to break the law that protects these rights hundreds of times? I commend the committee for holding this hearing to show that you take seriously workers' rights to organize and to sit at a bargaining table if they choose, even if their employer is a huge company that really doesn't want them to have a union. It's a bedrock of our democracy that the law applies to everyone, including the most powerful. So I believe that much is at stake in ensuring that Starbucks workers' rights to unionize are protected and respected. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Block. Senator Cassidy is voting, so I'm going to introduce his witnesses. Former Representative Bradley Byrne served 4 terms in Congress and has more than 30 years of experience as a labor and employment attorney in private practice. Mr. Byrne, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've submitted a written statement. I won't read that to you. I do not represent Starbucks. I do not have a position about whether they have or have not committed unfair labor practice violations. I do not have a position on whether they should or should not be organized. I believe that it's up to the workers, and I trust the wisdom of the workers at the Starbucks stores to make those decisions in appropriately conducted elections. I'm here because I represent a whistleblower, a longtime employee, professional employee at the National Labor Relations Board, who has come forward to the Inspector General of the National Labor Relations Board with information that there have been significant irregularities, violations of the neutrality of the organization of the agency during at least one such election. Now, why does that matter? The process that we follow in these elections is very important because, as the previous speaker said, it's to make sure that the employees make a free and uncoerced decision. It's not to protect the management of the company, it's not to protect the union, and it's certainly not to protect the NLRB. The NLRB is required to conduct what we call laboratory conditions from the time a petition is filed until the time you have an election. That means you've got to make sure that the voting environment is free, that there isn't any coercion, and most especially in this case, that the NLRB isn't putting its finger down on one side or the other. They shouldn't favor the employer, they shouldn't favor the union. They should be professional and neutral in all cases. And in my experience, the vast majority of the employees of the NLRB do exactly that. Unfortunately, we know that in at least one case that was violated. It was violated egregiously, and a hearing officer found 4 different violations. Now, here's the problem with all that. If you do something that challenges the integrity of the process, you've challenged the integrity of the vote. And if you challenge the integrity of the vote, you've challenged the integrity of the entire system. Because remember, it's there to give the employees the final decision, not the company, and certainly not the union. So what I would like for this committee to do is to use its oversight authority, which is considerable, to look into what happened, not just in this one case, but to determine if there is a pattern in practice at the NLRB of violating their neutrality obligation. And if there is a pattern in practice, is that pattern in practice being directed from people in higher echelons of the agency? I am very concerned by public statements, public positions taken by the General Counsel of the NLRB. The General Counsel is a political appointee. There's nothing wrong with that. That's true when you have Republican presidents, just like it's true when you have a Democrat president. But whether you're a Democratic-appointed NLRB General Counsel or Republican-appointed, you have an obligation to maintain that neutrality. You have an obligation to follow the law. What this General Counsel has done is attack the process for elections altogether. She wants to do away with elections. That greatly disturbs me. It flies in the face of long-settled law, and it also flies in the face of what I've been hearing a lot about recently, and that is workplace democracy, workforce democracy. Well, if we believe in workplace democracy, we ought to give employees the right to vote as to whether or not they want a union. If they do, as they have done in some of these Starbucks elections, that's the law. They get to have a union represent them. But in many cases, they vote no. In the vast majority of cases where I represented an employer representation election, the employees chose not to have a union represent them. Fine. Whichever way they vote is good. But they ought to have the right to hear both sides of the story, which they won't have if they don't have an election. And they ought to have the ability to walk into a secret place and cast a secret vote so that no one is coercing them to vote whichever way they want to vote. So I asked this committee and the Congress to look at this very carefully because of the seriousness of the situation. It should be all of our concern that we make sure that we have true integrity in these elections so that the result is final and fair. I thank you for the opportunity to be here and look forward to your questions.
Mr. Byrne, thank you very much. Rachel Gressler is a senior research fellow in economics at the Heritage Foundation. She previously served as a senior economist at the Joint Economic Committee of Congress. Ms. Gressler, thanks very much for being with us.
Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
Okay, hold it close.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. First, I want to recognize the important role that unions have played in U.S. history in securing important worker safety protections, just wages, and giving workers a previously unheard voice. Many of the things that unions fought for are now protected by law, and the globally competitive economy has empowered individual workers and ultimately weakened unions' advantages. For example, when the only cars that Americans could buy were those that were produced in the U.S., the United Auto Workers Union could impose above-market compensation. While that benefited union workers in the short run, it meant more expensive cars, fewer people able to afford them, and fewer workers needed to produce them. When foreign competition entered and unions maintained their excessive compensation demands, automakers began shuttering their doors, and domestic auto production today is 1/3 of what it used to be 2 decades ago. In addition to shifting to more service-oriented jobs, American workers have become more educated and more mobile. The average worker changes jobs 12 times throughout their career, which means pensions built on decades of service are less desirable. And rigid pay scales may work for 9-to-5 jobs where everybody produces 20 widgets a day, but few jobs today are so routine, and most workers want to be paid based on what they contribute. Consequently, union advantages have been waning. Since 2007, non-union wages have increased 56%, while union wages have increased only 41%. And union pensions have recklessly promised $677 billion in pension benefits that they haven't set aside to pay. Instead of adapting to provide new services that workers value, unions have turned to political force and inciting animosity. Depicting company management as 12-foot diseased rats is dehumanizing and destructive. Most people want to be part of a team, not a battle. In fact, positive workplace relationships are the biggest indicator of employee satisfaction. Most people also don't want their money taken to pay for things that they don't value. But many unions spend more money on politics than they do representing workers. A recent study found that only 16% of teachers' union dues go to the local union that bargains on their behalf. The rest goes to the state and the national unions that spend a lot of that money on politics. Unionization hit an all-time low of 10.1% last year. And in part, that's because employers can be more responsive and accommodating to workers' desires without a union dictating what they can and can't do. Instead of wooing workers, unions are trying to forcibly reverse their decline through laws that would take away workers' privacy, their secret ballot elections, their right to work without paying a union, and the ability to be their own boss. But instead of forcing workers into one-size-fits-all unions, alternative worker organizations could benefit more workers. For example, Major League Sports bargain collectively for some things, but players are able to negotiate their own salaries. Professional organizations like the Freelancers Union provide educational services, and they bring workers together to pool benefits. And worker choice models would allow more workers who want to be in a union to have that option while not forcing anybody who doesn't want to be in the union. The Employees' Right Act would secure fundamental rights like privacy, secret ballot elections. It would elevate the voices and the opportunities of union and non-union workers alike. And it would also protect the livelihoods of 59 million Americans who participate in independent work. It would also preserve the small business franchise model. The recent shortage of workers and a longer-term decline in labor force participation is troubling for the economy and civil society. To help more people find meaningful and productive work, policymakers should expand apprenticeship opportunities, enable more portable benefits, and end unnecessary regulations that prevent employers from offering more flexible and generous benefits. Additionally, it is the NLRB's job, not Congress's, to investigate unfair labor practices and to render consistent and impartial decisions. It's also the NLRB's job to oversee fair elections and to protect workers' and employers' free speech rights. I don't know about specific unfair labor practice charges at Starbucks or any of the roughly 18,000 unfair labor practices filed with the NLRB last year, but I do know from my work advocating for workplace flexibility that Starbucks has been a leader in expanding benefits like paid family leave and providing college tuition and high starting wages. The fact that their turnover rate is less than half the industry average suggests that they're doing something right. Running a business and attracting and retaining workers isn't easy, and employers shouldn't have to fear congressional harassment if they don't want a union coming between them and their workers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me begin my questioning with Ms. Carter and Mr. Saxton. You have heard, I suspect, Mr. Schultz saying that he obeys the law. He respects the right of workers to organize if that is what he wants. Starbucks does not engage in union busting. Ms. Carter, what is your observation about that?
My observation is that that is not my experience while working in a store that was unionizing. Thank you for your question, Chairman. So, you know, we were forced to go through multiple captive audience meetings in our store, and our store was the only one to stay open throughout the entirety of the pandemic. Unfortunately, because of a captive audience meeting, a member of management who traveled to our store from, I don't know where, I had never met them before, gave multiple partners COVID in this meeting, and we had to shut down for 5 days. Now, that's a little bit of union busting and outside experiences, but kind of crazy to go through.
Did workers have any option about whether or not they would undergo this meeting with the Starbucks executive?
We were scheduled for that meeting, and it actually was our very first one, so we weren't told at this point in time that we didn't have to attend. So it was very much not an option.
Okay. Let me get to Mr. Saxton. You heard what Mr. Schultz said. What do you think?
Thank you for your question, Senator. That hasn't been my experience. In my store, when we filed, they fired our store manager. He was a very well-liked store manager. He actually helped in our organizing effort once he was fired. After that, you know, they brought in an interim store manager and a store manager team to make our store more efficient. That making our store more efficient resulted in us constantly coming into work with everything moved around. So every single day we had to relearn where everything was. With that, the interim store manager would take notes about what she would hear or see on the floor, and she'd write down partners' names. We didn't find out until after we had our election that those people that, the names that she had written down, were going to be written up and or fired. So
what I'm hearing from you is you didn't quite accept Mr. Schultz's view that he is not engaged in anti-union activity.
They have definitely engaged in anti-union activity.
Let me get to Ms. Block. If I heard you correctly, I think you indicated that what you are seeing at Starbucks is unprecedented, and that in modern history, and that what Starbucks is doing is also sending a signal to the corporate world that, in a sense, if they can get away with this, other corporations can as well. Am I right on that?
Yes, I think that that's a fair interpretation of how this campaign may be perceived. And in my mind, most importantly, among other low-wage workers that work for large corporations that have the resources to engage in this kind of drawn-out, long litigation over their activity during an organizing campaign.
What is the purpose, do you think, of these long, never-ending efforts on the part of companies? Why do they do that?
I mean, I try not to speculate on other people's motives, but, you know, I am concerned that we are seeing now fewer petitions being filed by other Starbucks employees. There can be lots of reasons for that, so I think, you know, time will tell. But, you know, as other witnesses and as other members of the committee have indicated, there is necessarily a huge power imbalance between workers and the company. And so there's this ability to play things out over a long time just exacerbates that kind of power imbalance.
Okay. Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Byrne, you represent a constituent of mine who's bravely provided information to the NLRB Inspector General of misconduct that she witnessed during the representation election at a Starbucks in Overland, Kansas. And specifically, a hearing officer found there was substantial disparity between the communications the region shared with Starbucks and the communications the region shared with the union. What makes this an issue?
Well, you're supposed to be neutral. And so if you're having communications with the union about an issue, you need to have communications with management as well. And if you're not having that even communication, then clearly you're favoring one side over the other.
Now, some of the communications seem to me fairly benign, but again, I'm not a lawyer. But I gather it has to be even keel. Whatever you do for one, you have to do for the other.
That's correct. So one of the things that came out in that is that the labor board agent actually allowed the union to bring 2 people to vote at the board's office. And this was a mail-in election where you had a stipulated agreement. So the communications weren't about some small things, they were about big things, i.e. the vote.
So the stipulation that you shall mail in is really kind of ironclad, and what may seem just kind of like an accommodation, really they should have said, no, we can't, you got to go down the street, you got to put in a mailbox or something like that.
A stipulated agreement is the law of the case. They have to follow that. Now, if they want to vary it, you go to both sides and say we need to vary it as to this employee or that employee. But you don't just unilaterally do it after having a conversation with the union and you haven't had any conversation with the company.
So the guy or gal who might forget to mail it, and I forget to mail bills all the time, that would take out that variable of whether or not they would actually remember to put it in the mailbox or don't have stamps at home or whatever the variable would be. I kind of get that. Let me ask you this. Can you tell us about records brought forward by your client that implicates a pattern and practice that the union received accommodations by NLRB in other regions, not just Kansas?
Senator, let me be very careful how I say this. There is a subpoena that has been issued to my client by the House Committee. We're in the process of reviewing that and complying with it. I can say, without going into the details of it, that there are documents in there that would indicate that the sort of thing that happened at this one particular election has happened in other elections as well. So there is a basis to determine whether or not there has been a pattern of practice, not just in Starbucks cases, although the House subpoena was limited to Starbucks cases. But if it's happened in Starbucks cases, is it happening in other cases across the country?
Let me ask you this. Much has been made about the number of filings of unfair labor practices by people seeking to unionize against Starbucks. And yet NLRB, in a letter that I submitted for the record earlier, or I'm sorry, in other documents, has stated that over half of unfair labor practices are dismissed or withdrawn. As a labor lawyer, can you speak to the tactical use of unfair labor practice complaints in an organizing campaign?
In my experience, the union files unfair labor practice charges, multiple unfair labor practice charges in every election, and it's part of their strategy for handling it. And as you said, the vast majority of them are thrown out. They don't even get to the point of having a hearing because they didn't have any basis in the first place. So it's a pattern that the union follows to try to intimidate the employer and try to eat up the time in the election.
Ms. Gressler, Republicans made it pretty clear that we support the right to unionize. But you point out that the labor laws we have are like sometimes 100 years old. And yet you promote some reforms that would modernize it, if you will. And you mentioned, for example, Major League Baseball, a special case, but in which merit actually dictates wages along with the baseline of benefits. Can you just quickly summarize some other things that if we were to come together on a bipartisan basis, you would recommend that we do to help people who seek to unionize, but to update the whole concept?
Yeah, and there I think the focus has to be on the workers and their choices. And so they may choose to have an organizational structure that allows them to pull together and say these certain benefits are important to all of us and we want to have the same level of them. But there are other things that we want to be able to negotiate more flexibly. And that could also happen across a big company that has multiple different stores in different states that is facing different conditions. And I think the importance there is letting the workers have the choice to do that. And so right-to-work states allow this, but they also in those states have representation on everybody. So even if the worker isn't paying into the union, they are represented by the union. Now the union would say that that's a free rider problem. So you could eliminate that by saying the union does not have to represent you if you're not paying them. So if you want that representation, you've got to pay. But if you don't want it, you can be on your own and you can negotiate by yourself, or you can have a separate type of negotiation, but just having the choice actually be focused on the worker themselves.
Gotcha. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair Sanders and Ranking Member, and welcome to all of you. It's really, I'm glad to see you here, and I want to thank you in particular, the Starbucks organizers for being here. Ms. Carter, I understand you organized one of the first stores in the South for the Starbucks workers, and I wanted to ask you something. Mr. Schultz talked repeatedly this morning about this partner relationship that he says that he has with his employees, and I'm just wondering, from your experience, how do you have a partnership with hundreds of thousands of people, and when you were doing the organizing in your, when you were doing your organizing, like, what did you find? Why were people wanting to be part of a bargaining unit?
Thank you so much for your question, Senator. So it's about the rules and regulations that are in place and how we are actually able to service the customer. Right. Throughout COVID, we really saw a decline in maintenance in our stores. We really saw a decline in upkeep. And frankly, when you report these concerns to your manager, it just really feels like you're talking sometimes to a wall, as if you're just not getting any response. So that was a huge catalyst to why we wanted to organize, but also just the wages and rent rising in our state. It's just not something that worked for us, and also benefits are just too expensive for us to actually be able to use. So rather than forego a paycheck, we just choose not to have health insurance. So those are a lot of the reasons why we chose to organize. And I'll say Howard Schultz does not feel like a partner to me as well.
Thank you. Mr. Saxton, was there anything, I'd like to know what you'd like to add to this. And I'm particularly interested in the challenges that folks have dealing with schedules that are uncertain and unpredictable. And, you have maybe a promise of some hours that you then don't get. And how would being part of a bargaining unit help you deal with those kinds of challenges as a worker?
Thank you. To answer the first question, some of the challenges that we faced were, when I talked to some of my coworkers, they overwhelmingly were talking about the training. The training is 1 week where you're learning everything, and then 1 week where you're practicing everything. And then for shift supervisors, it's you go through the same barista training, and then you do shift supervisor training, which functions the same way. Then scheduling was a huge thing, and this kind of goes into your second question. So I currently have at my store someone who used to get 25 hours a week. They are a very much so a supporter of our union. They have been reduced down to 5 hours a week. I think that speaks for itself. If they really want to be partners with us, they'd hear those concerns, and they make those changes, and they'd feel so. Starbucks has an empty seat that they leave at the shareholder table for their partners. They fill that seat and hear what we have to say.
Thank you. Ms. Block, earlier this morning when we were talking with Mr. Schultz, several of us were pressing him on this disparity in disparities in which the unionized folks were being treated versus the non-unionized people were being treated. I particularly was talking about this ability for the unionized shops to be able to access the credit card tipping mechanism. Mr. Schultz said that his understanding of the law was that he could not do that. Now, when I questioned him, he shifted a little bit and he said, well, actually, it's our preference not to do that. Could you just address this issue? Could you address this issue?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So I think as Mr. Schultz eventually was sort of circling around, once the union waived its right to bargain over those particular benefits,
right,
it would not have been unlawful for Starbucks, at least what I can tell from the information that's become public, would not have been unlawful for Starbucks to grant those benefits to the stores that had unionized. But there's another dimension too in the allegations that in fact withholding those benefits was itself an unfair labor practice. And that goes to the question of why they made that judgment. So if it isn't accurate that the law precluded them from providing those benefits, then you say, well, then what was the reason? And if the reason for withholding those benefits was to retaliate against workers for having a union, to intimidate them in how they exercise that right, then that crosses the line from just not being accurate sense of the law to being an unfair labor practice. And so that's the question that will now be before the board.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Just a few more questions. Recently, Starbucks raised their minimum wage, I suspect, in response to union organizing. But tell me, and certainly it's not just people working at Starbucks, what's it like to try to get by on $15 an hour or $16 an hour, number one? And number two, picking up on Senator Smith's question about scheduling, do people know if they're going to have 40 hours or 30 hours or 20 hours? If I go to work, how many hours am I going to be working in a week? Ms. Carter? Or?
Thank you for your question, Chairman Sanders. So to address your first question, $15 an hour is not enough to pay bills and actually survive in this world today as we know it. We often struggle. One of the main things I hear from my partners is I can't pay my light bill and put gas in my car at the same time, or I can't put gas in my car at the same time and get groceries. So just imagine having to ration the most important things that you need to survive day in and day out. Another point that I'm really glad you brought up is the hour requirement in order to obtain benefits. In my 4 years at the company, I've never had a problem qualifying for benefits until now suddenly. I actually just was taken off of Starbucks benefit policies because I have not been scheduled the appropriate hours or anywhere close to my availability for the better part of
Explain that to the world out here. What does that mean?
Yeah, so basically.
So if I am your supervisor, I can reduce your work week. And because I've reduced your work week, you now lose your benefits? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. We have an hour requirement per week. It's 20 hours per week. The threshold was lowered due to COVID. However, that has now since, I believe, been removed. Because of that, my hours were cut basically since around a little bit before Christmas last year. And so I actually just recently lost my benefits because of that hour requirement. Having your benefits tied to your hours when you don't get to determine the hours you work doesn't really seem conducive, in my opinion.
All right, let me go to Mr. Saxton. People have to pay rent. They have to deal with all the needs of a family. How do you do a budget if you don't know exactly how many hours you're going to be working and what kind of paycheck you get at the end of the month?
I mean, you simply can't do a budget when you don't know. Like I said, there is a partner at my store whose hours went down from 25 to 5. They've now had to get a second job. Even with that, the scheduling around their second job, and with Starbucks, how do you have a second job if you just don't know? Starbucks puts out its new schedule every 3 weeks. So 1 week you can have 25. The next week you could have 10. The week after that you could have 15.
That's theoretical. Is that common? Does that really happen?
That is very common. That is very common.
So how do you know if you're going to be able to pay your rent if you got 10 hours?
You get a second job, you do DoorDash, which many of my partners in my store have had to do.
All right, tell me about health care. I don't want to misquote Mr. Schultz, but he talked something about comprehensive health benefits. When I hear that, I think that people have universal health care, that they can walk in the doctor, not have to take out their credit card, or what's going on with health care? Ms. Carter or Mr. Saxton, jump in.
So with healthcare, I actually had healthcare with Starbucks. I had myself, my wife, and my daughter covered. The thing about the coverage is it's offered in tiers. So there's like the gold, silver, and bronze. These tiers, you still have to pay your copay. You still have to take out your card when you go to the doctor.
How much is copay, out of curiosity, or does it depend on the?
It depends on the level that you pick.
Okay. So would I be correct in assuming that if I'm working 10 hours a week, well, first of all, I work 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week, I don't get that benefit. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And if I'm working 20 hours a week, I'm not making enough money to pay the co-payment or the premium, right?
Correct.
You want to elaborate on this? Doesn't sound like maybe it's quite the comprehensive benefit that
It's
Mr.
not
Schultz.
very comprehensive at all. So with every wage increase, they increase how much you have to pay into the health insurance. So that means more of your check is coming out for subpar health insurance that doesn't cover everything. So I have been reduced to going back to just the VA. Besides my firing, I've had to go back to the VA to get things that Starbucks health insurance would not cover.
It would seem to me that if I was sitting where you were sitting and fighting for a union, one of my demands would be consistent and reasonable scheduling that I had some input to. Is that true?
Thank you, Senator Sanders. Yeah, that is absolutely one of our proposals, is to have better consistent scheduling, and also, just making sure that, well, I don't want to misspeak about the bargaining proposals, but I do know that having that consistent schedule is definitely something that we are fighting for in this movement, because, if our benefits are tied to it, we need to know that we can get those hours and not have to have this ridiculous availability that, like Jason said, keeps you from actually pursuing a second job or pursuing some other form of income.
What does this availability mean? What does that mean?
So I believe it was I don't want to misquote what around the time that this was instituted, but it doesn't apply to union stores. But for non-union stores, I believe you have to have 180% of your hours available on top of the availability that you have. If you want to, so say for example, you want to work 12 hours a week, you have to have 18 hours available. If you want to work, I'm bad at math, so I'm just going to use that example. But yeah, that pretty much explains it.
Okay. Anything more that you would like to add? Mr. Saxon, Ms. Carter? No? Okay. All right. On behalf of the committee, let me thank all of our panelists for your testimony. We appreciate it very much. This is the end of our hearing. And for any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due in 10 business days, April 12th by 5 p.m. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 statements from stakeholder groups in support of Starbucks workers in their fight to join a union freely and fairly. The committee stands adjourned.